Hello! Wait, let me just lower that sound for a second. Hello, lovelies. How are we tonight? I hope that you had a great weekend. And I hope that, you had some time to relax and to just, chill out for the weekend. Tomorrow is a new week. Tomorrow is a Monday, but that doesn't matter here, we're Sunday night, it doesn't mean that, we shouldn't be doing a live stream and hanging out, I am here to entertain you. I am here to make sure that your weekend closes on a good note, or should I say, a bloody note in that instance, because actually tonight, what we're gonna be doing is not gonna be that, fun. It's gonna be entertaining, but it's not gonna be easy, let's say, because we're gonna go into a really gruesome cult, and we're gonna basically look into it together. We're gonna basically talk about the cult of Roch, Thériault, and the Anthill Kids. We're gonna be watching a couple of videos as well, kind of going over some of the stuff that happened during the active years of this cult. And I'm super excited to talk to you about it, not because I think it's a great story, but just because I think it's important to talk about these things to understand why people join cults, why do people follow these people, and, what happens there, what the heck is going on there. And especially in these years, there was a big surge in the search for spirituality. Christianity was struggling to keep its members active in their communities, so a lot of those people had a hole to fill, and I'm curious to look into that. But first, hello Toxic Hunter, how are you? But first, I'm gonna just introduce myself real quick. I'm Amy, I'm from Canada, Montreal, and basically, over here on Twitch, I do a variety of things. I play games, such as Planet Zoo, The Sims. I also do horror games, such as The Forest, Phasmophobia, and whenever we do have enough people, we also do community nights where we can play Among Us, we can play Jackbox, and other multiplayer games. And I'm live about 4 to 5 days a week, depending. You can look at my schedule on the panels, and you should see where I'm usually live. Sometimes there's going to be an extra stream in there, either on Tuesdays or on Saturdays, but most times I'm going to be live about 4 days a week. I'm good, thanks. How are you? I'm good, thank you so much. I'm pretty tired. I had a very busy weekend, but I am pretty much good. I'm good. But yeah, if you're new here, don't forget to drop a follow. Don't forget to join the Discord and to share the stream around. It really does help, to bring more people in and to grow, the community that we already have. We are a very little humble corner of Twitch, but I do think that we're a fun little bunch. And if you're, into that, just, click on that heart button and just join us. And so every Sunday, the idea, you got affiliated? Ooh, that's awesome. Congratulations. Let me just put on some creepy music, actually, because what we're about to get into is gonna be creepy. Exit soundtrack by Twitch. Okay, we're gonna go in here. Creepy music. Let me see. We can probably do like a playlist. Just like creepy, like background, like horror music, Yeah, okay, let's do that. All right. So, awesome. Well, congratulations. I'm really happy for you that you got affiliated. That's awesome. Did you get affiliated today? That's awesome. So tonight we're going to be talking about Roch, Thériault, and the Anthill Kids, and the concept of Cultify Tuesdays. Let me just open that screen, actually. So the concept of Cultify Tuesdays is really to go into, a bunch of different things, but mostly cults, conspiracy theories, myths and urban legends, as well as overall creepy stories that come from, claims from the paranormal, aliens, and all that good stuff. I'm a huge skeptic in general, so I do want to put that out there. I am someone who does not believe in ghosts. I am not religious. I also, I'm not a very spiritual person, in the sense that, you know, um, I find spirituality and solace in many things, but I am not someone who believes necessarily in a higher entity or a higher power. And so I'm going in with a very skeptic mind most of the time. However, the idea is really to stay open minded, just because I think that, if there are so many people who, subscribe to these ideologies and these conspiracies and stuff like that, I think there's probably a story there to tell. Doesn't mean that a story is necessarily true or whatever, but there is something there. So when it comes to cults and, these movements as well, that applies too, because if people are willing to join these things and to be a ride or die in these like harmful groups, there is definitely a story to tell there, and to understand why people join them, I think, is really important. I also want to put out there a trigger warning, especially for this episode. We're starting really harsh for Cultify Tuesday. I was gonna say Tuesdays. Bravo. Cultify Sundayz, because the Roch, Thériault and the Anthill Kids cult is very violent. It's violent, it's gruesome, it's bloody, and it will, we're going to be talking about subjects that, will touch on sensitive subjects such as sexuality, religion, sexual abuse, and, basically just overall abuse from, psychological, physical, and also, overall just straight up violence and murder and stuff like that. So if these subjects makes you a bit squeamish, or if you personally have certain sensitivities because of, things that may have happened in your life or happened to someone that you love, that's totally fine. You can absolutely skip this episode. I will not take it personally. I just want to make sure that I do put that out there. I'm gonna try to make a couple of trigger warnings throughout the stream, just to remind people that may join in, later. But basically, I just want to make sure that we put that out there. I'm not going to hold out on details. I'm not going to filter the story, because I think that there is value in telling the story like it is. There's a reason why this channel is, tagged as 18 plus. I just want to make sure that the people who do join here are adults who, can decide to, be a witness to these types of story or not. So let's start without further ado. Just before I start, actually, you know what? I'm gonna add a trigger warning text just on the bottom, just so that people can see the trigger warning, just in case, Oh, that's huge. Wait, let me just put that a bit smaller. Okay, we're gonna put this like on the bottom here, I guess. I think that's probably fine. So let me just do that, and let me just write. Okay, so trigger warning. So let's say just overall violence, murder, SA, abuse, just, cults. I'm trying to like all right. So this should this should be clear enough. Hopefully, I feel bad that I have to put all of these like trigger warnings, but I think that's important, just because not everybody necessarily likes to talk about these things. So I think that's totally fair. All right, so let's get into it, I guess. Maybe what I can do is just come back to the main screen real quick, just because I think maybe we can. All right. So today we're gonna be talking about Roch Thériault and the Anthill Kids. If you do not know who that is, I'm going to tell you real quick, and then we're going to go into the other screen and look at a couple of material. So, Roch Thériault is a Canadian cult leader who led a small religious group called the Anthill Kids. And that group was mostly active in Canada throughout a couple of different areas, but mostly active in Ontario, in a small forest near a river in Ontario. The cult was active from 1977 to, let me see here, 1989. And Roch, who is the cult leader, was a self-proclaimed, prophet, who also renamed himself Moïse, which is Moses in English, in French. And basically he founded this doomsday type cult. We've seen these doomsday cults in other groups, like the Jones, what's his face, Jones, what's his face, there was a couple of them, right? There was the Order of the Solar Temple. There was I remember that the Order of Solar Temple. That was crazy. Oh my. Hey Monteezy, how are you? How are you, Monteezy? Jones cult. I'm just trying to remember what that was. It was Jim Jones. Yeah, exactly. So Jim Jones, People's Temple. So all of these cults, Evan Gates, Realism, Manson Family, all of these groups, were really, really into the end of the world. Basically, a lot of their beliefs were based, on the fact that the world was gonna end, and that we're all doomed, and that you need to save yourself. I'm very good. Thank you for asking. We're talking about a really creepy cult today. I hope that's okay with you. Cult talk. Yeah, exactly. So Roch Thériault, was this man, who initially was a follower of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is one denomination of the of Christianity, basically, in Catholicism, and in this type of belief, it can be a little similar to Mormonism, where you believe you subscribe to the idea that you can have multiple wives, you can have multiple sexual partners, and that's totally fine. Let me just ban that person real quick. that person here. Okay. And basically, sorry, I have a thing in my eye. Ooh, okay. And so basically, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let's just click on that real quick, because let's read it. So, okay. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Protestant Christian denomination. Exactly. So Protestant, which is distinguished by its observance of Saturday, in the seventh day of the week in Christian and Jewish calendars, as the Sabbath, in its emphasis on the imminent second coming of Jesus Christ. The denomination grew of the Millerite movement in the United States during the mid to 19th century, and was formally established in 1863. Amongst its founders, blah blah blah. Distinctive teachings include unconscious state of the dead and the doctrine of an investigative judgment. Meaning that people who subscribe to, the religion, and who subscribe to the different ideologies and the overall, dogma of it all, would be saved. And since it was really, really focused on health, that was a very specific focus of this religion, right? Is that it was focused on living a very, very healthy life, a vegan life or vegetarian life. And, you know, they were really, really against smoking, cigarettes and stuff like that. Hey, Panini, how are you? So, you know, they were really, really about that. So they would go out, you know, and really talk against, you know, smoking, against taking drugs, against, you know, wearing leather, you know, and really talking about the environment. And, you know, they were, so, you know, from the surface of it, you know, the Seventh-day Adventist Church wasn't necessarily the worst thing, you know, like they had their problems, they had their issues, but that's not where the main problem comes into this cult. So let's go back to Roch, Thériault, right? So Roch Thériault is this guy. So he has a face, right? Like he has a long beard and he wears this type of like robe. Oftentimes it's either red or it's beige, or you know, it's like in a tan color, and also he strongly believed that people should not be wearing, you know, undergarments, so like bras, panties. You know, everybody that was in his cult usually would not really wear that stuff. But let's backtrack for a bit though, because obviously Roch was, like I said initially, really parts of let me just lower the music a tiny bit for me. Okay, so Roch, right, like he was really into health, faith, you know, and I really against smoking. And we will basically see that in the beginnings, because it's not like people who lead cults just begin as cult leaders, right? There is a bit of a ramp up to that. And basically when he first started, he was, like I said, you know, he was someone who was born basically in a very problematic, you know, situation. So already, you know, his start in the world was not the most positive. You know, he was born, you know, out of a how would I say that, a rape incident. I don't know if an incident is the right word, but basically his mother was, you know, raped by a man and had Roch as a result. So, you know, that's a pretty traumatic thing for probably his mother to go through. And, you know, so that's a really difficult thing to go through, right? I have to go. No worries. Thank you for passing by, Montizi. And, you know, they really were religious, and they were really into overall, you know, a very classic denomination of Christianity, about the Old Testament, the Bible, everything. You know, his family was pretty religious, and that was fine. But he did really believe his whole life, from a kid, you know, since he was a kid, that the end of the world would come, and that Jesus Christ would come back, and, you know, that Judgment Day would be here, and the world would end, and that you needed to save yourself, and all that good stuff that a lot of people who believe, you know, really strongly in the Old Testament would believe in. And he really believed, you know, in the war between good and evil, and, you know, sin and all that stuff, right? And eventually he did convert from Catholicism to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, just because I think that he had a lot of issues with, you know, the community that he was brought in, obviously, and Catholicism in general. And also because he was always about, you know, health and animals and, you know, veganism. The Seventh-day Adventist Church really did kind of like match with his own kind of values and faith. So it just made sense for him to convert to one to the other. And if you come here, let me just go back, right? So blah, blah, blah. Let me just go back. Boom, boom. I'm just trying to find back. Yes, okay. No. Yeah, so despite the fact that he was born, you know, in a very difficult situation, there was nothing really special about his childhood. You know, sometimes when we talk about murderers, we talk about cult leaders, we talk about gurus, there's a lot of like trauma sometimes in their childhood, and, you know, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of baggage, you know, to talk about. That's not really the case here. There's not really any like memorable events that happened in his childhood. You know, he was a very bright kid. He was not a problematic kid. There's no specific events, but you know, he did complain about his childhood, you know, in a way, just because, you know, of how he was born and stuff. And he did, you know, gain some sympathy from people. And he was a very, very, very charismatic person. He was a good talker. He was very intelligent, obviously. And so, you know, people were, from a very young age, really drawn to him and to listen to him talk. And he was just very good at talking to people and bringing people in. And so he, you know, he was just he was a showman, and he was always very spiritual, and that was there from, you know, his childhood into adulthood. So there is not anything really that problematic there up to a couple of years later. So yes, so basically, you know, Roch was married to a woman called Francine Grenier. It was a girl from, you know, one next town over, I think. And yeah, so it says, you know, they moved to Montreal, and over the next 3 years, she gave him 2 sons, Roch Sylvain, which is, you know, Roch Jr., and Francois. During this time, Roch Sr. developed some severe ulcers, which had to be excised surgically, and later developed complications from the surgery. The persistent discomfort of his medicine, and he taught himself a great deal, you know, on you know, the human anatomy and health and medicine, just because, you know, since he was a very intelligent person, right? So he was really into learning a lot of things by himself. He was very curious about everything that would happen to him, happen in life. So, you know, he was a very studious, a very curious, a very intelligent, and curious mind. So he would do that a lot, and that will come into play a bit later. So he moved his family back to Thériault Mines, and he began developing a lot of skill with you know, woodwork, and, you know, carpentry, you know, all that good stuff, you know, to be able to build houses, or, you know, do renovations in his house and all that good stuff. And he actually, you know, became the one of the basically speaker or main face of one of the local club called the Club Aramis. And he used that, you know, to kind of like make a parody of Catholicism. Like I said, he had a lot to complain about Catholicism, which is fair. I mean, he just had a lot of things that he did not like about how the religion was operating, and about how communities were operating in the church and everything. And that's ultimately what led him to join, you know, another denomination of Christianity. He also had a very big drinking problem. He was a drunk. And when I say a big drinking problem, I mean he would binge drink. He was a really, really, really nasty drunk. He had this problem throughout his whole life, you know, from early adulthood to basically now. Well, now he's in prison, I believe. I'm not even sure if he died, actually, but I think he may have died. So yeah, so he would do, you know, wood sculpting. He would sell them. And you know, when he would go to Quebec City and other cities, you know, for his different, you know, work events, and also to sell his sculpture, he met a woman called Giselle. And Giselle was, you know, kind of like his side chick, you know, let's say. And you know, after a while of really struggling, you know, obviously Roch started to have a lot of money problems. And mistress, yeah, exactly. So he started to have a lot of money problems. He had really bad credit, and they started to take his, you know, belongings. And when I say belongings, I mean, you know, they actually took his Thériault Mines residence. So he lost his house, and Francine had enough of it, so she packed her bags and she was like, see ya, you know, you're a drunk, you make no money, you have no job, and I'm done, basically. Right? Which, I mean, is understandable. He was not a very hardworking person. He would be basically really into, his wood sculptures and stuff like that, and he just did not make any money, and he was not a very useful, he was not a good partner, overall, and so she left, and we can understand that. But he became, very infatuated with Giselle, and so they became pretty much a couple, kind of like open, kind of like free-spirited. And, she was pretty spiritual as well. But he did not really let her in that easily. Like it says here, it says, although he was having sexual congress with her on a regular basis to keep up appearances, he made a bed in the back of his truck so that he would appear that his scruple forbade him from sleeping with a woman to whom he was not married. It was around this time that Roch Thériault discovered the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So that's where we come there. And the discovery of this religion for him is a really, really important cataclysm into the story, and a really important point of the story. The Adventists, ministered by a Guadalupan named Pierre Zita, met in a local motel room every Saturday. Roch was their most devoted follower. Let me just zoom in a little bit so if you can read. So Roch was their most devoted follower. He began following Adventist nutritional strictures and quit drinking. In fact, his enthusiasm for God's word began to unsettle the other Adventists, and his boastfulness irritated those who knew of his limited education. He was very into, being the leader in every group that he was in every group of friends, every spiritual group. He was that guy who would just basically kind of pretend like he was the guy, he was the man, he was there to help, he knew everything, and that would irritate a lot of people, and that's normal. So to make money, actually, wait. Roch became fascinated with the Old Testament, with its strict codes of masculine authority, and that's going to come back later on. He was also fascinated with the apocalypse, the end of the world, with its message of violent retribution for sin and the end of times, and the division of the human race into the elect and the reprobate. So, a point on that. So you'll see in the way that Roch led his cult, which was mostly composed of women. There were some men, but mostly composed of women. He really saw himself as a very powerful patriarch, and women around him were to serve him and through all angles, really, sexually, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and just, overall with chores and cooking, and, he was the man, right? And he treated women very, very poorly, and men as well, but not from the same angle, let's say, because he really saw women as servants of man. And when he did treat man badly, it wasn't from a place of, sexism and kind of sexual frustration and hatred, but it was more from, his own sadistic love for blood and experimenting, and we're gonna get into those experiments in a little bit. So to make money, obviously, he started to work for the Adventist Church, and he would go door to door, a bit like Mormons do that a lot. People who are Jehovah's Witnesses do that a lot. They go door to door. They sell books. They sell any type of merch, from books to sometimes even clothing, or subscription to various charities, or stuff like that. And so he began working for them, and that's how he made most of his money during that time. He proved himself quite capable. Obviously, like we said earlier, he's very charismatic, he's very good at talking, he's a very good speaker, so he was very good at doing that. Zita, who is the Adventist church leader in that area, began giving him his workshop on quitting smoking for Thériault to run. Which was a very, very, very typical traditional way to, it was a really good gateway for people to join the Adventist Church. They would basically present workshops and kind of a bit like seminars to stop smoking, so people would join them. And then afterwards they would kind of like present to them, the teachings of the Adventist Church through, the teachings to stop smoking. But again, that was not necessarily horrible. I mean, a lot of people want to stop smoking, and they actually developed a very efficient way to do that. The seminars seemed to work. A lot of people had very good, reviews, very good testimonials to say like, hey, that actually really helped me to stop smoking. And I mean, that's awesome. Like, why not? Like that's fine to me. And yeah, so he started to give those quit smoking seminars and workshops and presentations, and he started to get followers just by doing that. Like, he delivered these like quit smoking presentations and seminars, and people started to really become infatuated with him. And that's actually how the cult, these are the beginnings of his cult. Okay, you have to understand that these people who are joining him right now during these quit smoking seminars and workshops and stuff like that are people who will become core members of his cult. And at this moment, he was not necessarily trying to start a cult, but it kind of like happened, let's say. And then he, when he realized it, then that's when he was like, oh, I actually have a lot of people in my in my group right now. This is why I'm glad I'm a smoker. Right? I have my little Red Bull tonight. Okay, so in the people that joined, these were all very young people, by the way. Like, like I said, in the 70s, so you have to understand, this cult was active from, what? It was active from 77 to 89, right? So, from, in the 70s and in the 80s, like I said earlier, Christianity and Catholicism started to really they really started to lose in popularity and decrease in popularity. So a lot of people would quit the kind of like big churches and big religions to try and fill that spiritual hole somewhere else. And so that's why in these years you see a lot of these stories about cult and about small religious movements and gurus and cult leaders and all of that stuff, because especially during those years there was a really big need for filling that void, because a lot of people grew frustrated with the church and grew frustrated with the teachings from Catholicism and the other Christian denomination, especially. So a lot of people, and especially young people, who were really into, partying and the spirit of community and spirituality overall, but did not want to, have anything to do with the church, would try to find, a way to fill that spiritual need elsewhere, obviously. So that's why you see a lot of this. And obviously when you're young, you're a bit more naive, and when I say naive, I don't mean dumb, right? Because a lot of people say that if you're joining a cult, you're simple-minded, or that, you're not intelligent, or all that sort of stuff, and that's really not true, and that's been proven more and more. Anyone can be, impressionable would be probably a better way to say it. But it doesn't mean that they were unintelligent or that, they were simple-minded, people. It's really just that, when you're younger, you're just obviously a bit more impressionable. But he did actually later on gain followers that were highly educated people, just because he was that guy who was so good at convincing people that he was right and that the end of the world was coming. And he was so charismatic and such a good speaker. And he was such a good, convincer, a negotiator, and he would know where your weaknesses were, and he would push those buttons, like, to make you his puppet. Like, he was just very good at that. And you will see these kinds of people throughout history who are just like that, who are just really good at talking to people and getting them to believe what the fuck they're saying. And sometimes the things that they're saying are completely nonsensical, but that doesn't matter. They're just so good at talking to people and convincing them and making them fear, things like the end of the world. I mean, that was a classic back then, like how to make people do what you want, make them believe that that the end of the world is coming and that they need to save themselves in order to not die. I mean, people are gonna do what the fuck you want, and also these people are going to make you believe that they are, you know, messengers of God, or that they are reincarnation of like Jesus Christ, or like that kind of stuff. And he actually renamed himself Moses. Like, who does that? But people believed him, and he was really good at convincing people. So the people that joined are Solange, Chantal, Francine, Nicole Ruel, Maryse, José, Jacques, Claude, and another Jacques. And Jacques actually joined with his wife and his daughter, his baby daughter. You're gonna notice as well that they're gonna change names to join the cult. And I mean, that's a very typical tactic, you know, when you join a cult, to change your identity to fit, you know, within the community or fit within the group. They will change their names, and also will start to... Oh, thank you for the raid, Husky! Hello! Thank you for that raid. Wait, actually, I did not have the alert on here. Wait, that's fine. Thank you so much for the raid, Husky. How are you? How was your stream? I hope you had a good stream. What were you playing? Right now, Raiders, if you do not know what's happening, my name is Amy, and right now we are doing our Cultify Sundayz live stream, where we chat about cults, conspiracies, urban legends, myths, conspiracy theories, I think I said that, and various things like that. It was great. I was playing Fallout again, just about to go make some supper. Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you for that raid. Thank you so much. And I hope you had a good weekend as well. But yeah, so if you just joined, I'm Amy, and if you wanna follow the stream, I would greatly appreciate that. We're only actually 6 follows away from 400, so I'm pretty excited about that. And today we are hosting our very first Cultify Sundayz stream, and if ever subjects, there's a trigger warning on the screen. If ever you are sensitive about violence and anything touching... Hey Dorian, how are you? How are you? I asked then if you did that, Ray. I stayed in your stream and said you were hosting Amy. I mean, I'm assuming if you raid, you automatically host? I'm not sure. I'm good, thanks for asking. I'm pretty good. But yeah, if ever subjects of like overall violence and murder, because there's gonna be murder in this story and a lot of gruesome subjects, cult discussions, overall cult and you know, religious spirituality discussions are things that you know, you're not necessarily that interested about, or you don't want to deep dive into. That's totally fine. And there is going to be, you know, subjects of sexual violence and overall death, grief, and a lot of harsh and difficult subjects. So if ever you do not want to hear about that, that's 100% fine, and you can skip that one and join us for a gaming night. But I will not be putting on a filter for this story, just because I think that it's important to tell these stories at face value. These harmful, yeah, and that's why I'm just saying it, just because, like, that's, you know, I think I will just be leaving you like, that's totally fine, Dorian, and I even appreciate that you just came to say hello, and we're not in that moment yet, and I will give a warning when we do get there, when we do get into these subjects. But basically, you know, this man and this group was extremely harmful, and we are, you know, and I feel really not necessarily happy that victims came forward to talk about this story, but I feel, you know, I feel happy in the fact that, you know, some of them did find the strength to talk about it, because if not, I definitely can't handle diving into that stuff. Oh, that's totally fine. Like I said, you can join us back for a gaming night. And also, these won't always be that heavy. Like this one is pretty heavy, but for example, next week we're gonna be talking about the fake moon landing conspiracy theory, so that's gonna be more lighthearted. But this one is pretty heavy, so I'm just saying it just to make sure that, you know, nobody joins and like randomly, you know, hears about that heavy stuff without warning. So yeah, so let's continue. Let's just continue talking about that. So yes, so basically when he started to do these anti-smoking workshops, he started to gain some followers, and they would hang out mostly at Giselle's apartment because, again, Roch was pretty much homeless at that point. He was living with Giselle, and Xavier, I'll be turning the volume down. No worries, and thanks again. I hope I'm gonna see you at another time, you know, in a more positive stream. Hugs. I'm gonna give you a little heart like that, Dorian. And I hope you feel better. I know that, you know, you were going through some tough times these days, and so I just want to say that, you know, we're with you, and if ever, you know, you want to talk or whatever, you know, the Discord is open and you can just reach out or just chat, and that's totally fine. Have a really good night, Dorian, and thanks for that lurk. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the lurk. So okay, so when Roch would do these anti-smoking, yeah, so he would hang out at Giselle's apartment, and a lot of these people actually left and basically went to live with them, I guess. Like, they just lived at Giselle's apartment and like hung out, a bit like hippies vibes. And at that point, again, nothing was really wrong. People were just hanging out, and they were all Adventists, and they just hung out together, and that was fine. And, you know, it was kind of like of a they would sleep together, you know, they would smoke weed, they would drink, and it was mostly like fine. And they would crash on the couch, they would crash on the floor, wherever there was space. Thériault encouraged them all to get by in a world that was already doomed. So, you know, he really started early to talk about that stuff, where it's like, oh, we're in a world that's doomed right now. Like, just so you know, like, by the way, like, we're all doomed and the end of the world is coming. And so, you know, just want to say that, you know, just in case you want to do something about that. And he did, you know, express that he wanted to become a priest, and he had committed to total sobriety. So at that point, I believe that Roch at that point was not drinking, but the others were. Let's say here, it says, blah, blah, blah. Giselle would become jealous of the attention that girls lavished on Roch, obviously. And even if she realized that it wouldn't take much for Thériault, Winter is giving me the let's go outside now. Oh, that's fine. Totally fine. And Roch Adventist ministers began to fear that this group of disaffected youth were more attracted to Thériault personally than they were to the church. And that's another thing, right? So the Adventist church became a bit wary of Roch's influence, because a lot of people were actually more drawn to Roch himself more than the actual Seventh-day Adventist church. So they started to slowly but surely, you know, try to get Roch to stop kind of like taking those people away, because he would really lead these groups to listen to him and to do his workshops. And, you know, so he was less and less actually teaching the teachings of the Adventist church, but slowly starting to actually spew his own type of values and his own bullshit, basically. And in 97, he and his followers attended an Adventist retreat in Lake Rousseau in the woods in Ontario, and here that's where he met Gabrielle Lavallee. And we're going to talk about Gabrielle a bit later, but basically she is one of the victims of this cult, and him, who actually came forward later on to really talk about her story. And she's probably one of she's really one of the few that went on television to talk about her story, and she wrote a book. And if you do want to read that book, just Google Gabrielle Lavallee, and you will find, you know, interviews and books and stuff. And we're going to go into a bit of a video afterwards. I'm just going to finish a bit of that intro, and then we're going to actually watch a video together. And yeah, so basically he met Gabrielle, and he met Yolande, who was from France, who joined his the retreat that he was in. The natural scenery of Lake Rousseau apparently made a huge impression on Roch. In fact, at one point during the retreat, Thériault went hiking by himself and climbed up a rocky outcropping. He said he had a vision in which the sky was lit up with a white radiance, and the voice of God told him that he that the outcropping on which Roch was about to kneel was a holy place. This was the first incident of what would become the ruling element in the lives of those who had taken to following Thériault. So he would basically say, you know, that he was talking to God and that he was basically this Messiah, you know, who had a direct line with God, you know, and so people at that point who were extremely religious and had a lot of faith, you know, into Roch, into the Adventist Church, you know, were really in that, they were already in that state of mind of, you know, really believing that stuff. So it wasn't necessarily that hard for them to get into, you know, believing that as well, you know, that he was talking to God and that he was some type of chosen person, you know, to have this direct line with God. And with an entourage of 8 live-in followers, so they were living at Giselle's most of the time. And actually, let me just add, I just remembered, let me just add the alert in here, because I just want to make sure that we see the alerts. Okay, yeah, here we go. Boom. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. Okay. Yeah, and still, again, at that point, again, nothing that was very problematic started to happen. You know, they were just a religious group that hung out together. They lived at Giselle's with Roch, and Roch was this, you know, sort of like weird guy who was very good at talking to people, and he was a very good community leader, and the church was a bit angry at him because he gained more, you know, he was very good at getting followers to follow him, but he didn't necessarily lead them to be Adventist Church followers. He just wanted them for himself, right? So it's with an entourage of 8 live-in followers. So we have Giselle, we have Solange, we have Chantal, we have Francine, we have Nicole, Gabriel, Jacques, and Claude with their young daughter. That's when he started to have a reputation of being a healer, and that he had, you know, again, he had connections with various people from the Adventist Church, and, you know, health, food, and mission literature suppliers. And that's when he decided it was time to move his motley band from Thetford Mines. He established them in Sainte Marie in the Beauce region, that's in Quebec. And here they opened the Healthy Living Clinic, an alternative medicine venue where you could get organic foods, holistic literature to help you cure any ailment, cash up front, of course. Thériault insisted they all wear a uniform. So again, that's a second element of a very typical thing that cults do, is that they make people wear a bit of a uniform or a clothing code. So, you know, changing names, wearing a uniform, and that's the thing with this guy, right? Is that he would include these or perhaps he would introduce these things one-on-one. You know, he wouldn't just like say like, okay, so if you join us, you need to do this and this and that. It was a very gradual thing, again. So it's not like people went into this cult, you know, with the whole book laid in front of them or the whole table exposed in front of them, right? Roch would basically kind of like figure it out as he went, which strangely worked in that case, because it's not like he would scare people into joining him. You know, it was kind of that thing where he would attract them with various, you know, claims related to health and anti-smoking and like spirituality and stuff, and then afterwards, one by one, he started to implement these weird kind of concepts, you know. So he would put his, you know, claws into you in a very gradual way, which is very efficient when it comes to founding a cult. So Thériault insisted they all wear a uniform, ankle-length pullover tunic, green for the women and beige for the men. With Roch wearing a dark brown robe of a similar cut. Sometimes he would wear red as well. Not only he was making money in this enterprise, he was also attracting followers. Several of the clinic's patrons volunteered time or financial donations, including one, Léomarc Fauché, who sold his worldly possessions to fund the clinic. So this guy actually sold everything he owned and his estate to fund this clinic and join with his wife and kid. And we're talking about a successful guy, successful business guy here who's just joined Roch and the Anthill kids like that. Jacques Giguère and Maryse Grenier did likewise, and Maryse and José Petier rejoined the group. A strange dynamic took hold of the group with all the women except Maryse, who hated being with the commune. So Maryse will be someone who we're going to come back later on, but she was one of the people in the group who actually hated being there, competing for Roch's attention. Eventually, Giselle became very concerned that she might lose Roch to one of the girls and took the initiative to propose to him herself. A week later, he agreed, and they were married on January 8th, 1978, at an Adventist church in Montreal. There was no honeymoon, nothing really special about the whole event. The group piled back in the van for the 5-hour trip home, Thériault joking with the other girls all the way home. So here, there was something really awful about this because they were in this truck. So coming back from the wedding, Roch was driving with some of the other members in the front, and Giselle was actually in the back of the truck on a mattress. I think alone, or with other people, but she was separated from Roch during that 5-hour drive, and he was laughing at Giselle and making jokes about her and saying that he would like basically have sex with other girls while his newlywed wife was in the back of the truck on a mattress crying. You know, so he was just an asshole from the get-go. So we can just get that out of the way. Like, Roch is an asshole, okay? So that he was just awful. So again, Giselle cried on the mattress in the back, increasingly convinced that it had been a way to cement his relationship with the Adventists with a display of sincerity. So she was kind of convinced that Roch actually married her just for convenience and to kind of like prove to the Adventist church that he was loyal. And I have my personal theory on that because I think that Roch just wanted to calm the Adventist church because they thought, right, that Roch was a bit of a wild card there, and they were growing more and more careful of him, and they were starting to get weary, right, and they were starting to doubt, you know, his actual faith and actual loyalty to the church. And so he would do a couple of these events and workshops and stuff like that, kind of like to say like, hey guys, that's fine, like I'm still with you guys, it's totally fine, like I'm still an Adventist, you know, like you don't have to worry about me. Because obviously he was working for the Adventists, they were giving him money. So if he were to just like leave right then, you know, he would probably get into a bit of a financial awkward situation. So I think that he was just trying to get the Adventists to get off his back. So the Adventists were not convinced, obviously. Pierre Zita, who is the Adventist leader in that area, tried approaching the parents of many of the girls. So obviously all the women that joined Roch had, you know, families and parents and stuff like that. And a lot of them were worried. So Pierre Zita approached many of their families. And he also tried to convince Giselle to leave Roch. But Thériault had a bit of too much of a hold on everyone, and he already had his claws way deep into them, so that really didn't do much. The Thériault's place in the hearts of his followers was much too deep for families or friends to displace. Even when the police came at the behest of the families of some of the girls, they refused to speak. Thériault was their elected face to the outside world. Even when the local businessmen began filing into the police station to complain about Thériault's inability to pay outstanding bills, the police hands were tied. So obviously, and that's a third element of are you in a cult? So again, changing names, right? Wearing uniforms or some type of clothing code. And here, starting to get, starting to cut ties with close one and family members. These are really, really three very classic elements of, cult and sex in general. And this one was no different. I mean, that's a very classic thing, to be, less and less exposed to the world, and Roch was very good at keeping them at a distance. And also, you're gonna see later on, it's gonna become even more and more obvious, because they're gonna move into the country basically, and they're gonna move in a forest and basically live as if they were 100 years behind. Like right now, we're at the end of the 70s, early 80s, and you know, they were living in the city, mostly a small town, but still like in a city. And you're gonna see they're gonna live in the woods with nothing very soon. And that does not help, you know, being exposed to the real world, where perhaps you may find out that you're in a weird situation. So in March of 78, Geraldine Gagné-Auclair was admitted to the Healthy Living Clinic, the Roch's company, you know, who was a health clinic, let's say. She had been undergoing treatment for leukemia in Quebec City, and things seemed to be going well, but Auclair's husband fell in with Thériault. Roch convinced Mr. Auclair to let him visit Geraldine in the hospital, where Roch got in a loud argument with the doctors over the matter of Geraldine's treatment, particularly the amount of drugs they were giving her. Roch convinced Mr. Auclair to check the 38-year-old cancer patient Geraldine out of the hospital and into the living clinic, where even Geraldine's own father was not permitted to visit. So basically, Geraldine had cancer, right? And he convinced her husband to move her out of the hospital and to move into the Healthy Living Clinic, the cult clinic. And the father and his family was not allowed, and her family was not allowed to visit her, which is awful. Roch began treatment for leukemia, and the treatment was grape juice and organic foods. You know, because everybody knows that grape juice and organic foods cures cancer, I guess. So, and this was before COVID. Exactly, yikes. Geraldine Gagné died in the clinic. So she died. So that's actually the first death that occurred under Roch's, let's say, reign. So that was the first death. Definitely not the worst. Probably the one that is the least problematic. Because we're going to see that there are more people that are going to die. And they did not die in such circumstances. So Thériault told his follower that he had gone into a room, kissed her, and that she was awakened from death, but that in the end, when God's want people, he will take them. So, you know, it was Geraldine's time. So that's what he told people, and they believed him. During the same period of the clinic's existence, the parents of a 19-year-old multiple sclerosis victim, Gabrielle Nadeau, placed her under the care of Thériault, who they had met at an anti-smoking workshop. So, again, people were starting to bring in sick family members with very serious illnesses for treatment under Thériault's care, which is where things start to become very scary and extremely harmful, because obviously Thériault was not a doctor. You know, like, he's not someone who is allowed to perform any sort of, you know, treatment or things on people. But you will see into the course of this conversation, he did so multiple times and people died. So in April of 78, Thériault was voted out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Zida's initiative. So that's when the Adventist Church was like, hey, listen, you're not, you know, even close to the type of followers that we want among us, you know, and you're out, and we don't want to do anything with you, and you're cut out. We don't care about you, you know, your own thing, and if people want to stay with you, that's their problem, like, fuck you, you know. And so they voted him out. He didn't care. And his next move was to marry some of his followers together, in spite of the fact that not only did he lack any authority to perform marriages whatsoever, his followers actually had not expressed any interest in getting married whatsoever. So he would marry people who didn't really care about each other or didn't really want to marry each other, at least not to the man Roch decided they were to marry. Claude was paired with Solange. Jacques was paired with Nicole. Solange invited her parents to the ceremony, and on advice from their priest, they decided to attend, if only to show Solange that they still loved her. So some of their family members showed up just to say, like, hey, we're still here, like, if you need us, like, we're here. They reported that Roch's wedding ceremony was not what they expected, to say the least. Thériault's rambling speech stressed the women's role of subservience to the man. Some of the women in Solange's family wept, and not for joy. So again, to come back to that, Thériault did not respect women whatsoever. He was an extremely patriarchal man, who strongly believed in Old Testament's teachings, and he believed that women were were there to serve men, and that was very clear. He was extremely clear in those beliefs. He would remind the women multiple times of their place in this group, and he did so during their weddings as well. That spring, Giselle was pregnant, and she was feeling rejected by the lack of attention of Roch. Again, Roch is Giselle's husband at that point, and she's pregnant, and he's treating her like shit. Since their marriage gave her a new husband, and she gave Roch an ultimatum. Either he breaks the commune and encourage his followers to find new homes, because everybody's living at Giselle's, remember, or she would move back with her father. Thériault's answer was to smash her in the mouth and forbid her to leave the room for 2 days. So before we move on, I want to just remind, trigger warning, things are going to start to get violent, and I want to make sure that you're aware of that. Again, I am not going to leave any details out of the story. We're not going to be able to go into everything just because there is so much, but for the stuff that we're going to talk about, I'm not going to leave any details out, just because, again, I think it's important to tell these stories at face value, and I think it's important that we stay, good thing I'm sitting down for this. Yeah, exactly. And I just want to say that, again, there's going to be subjects, that will, again, touch on violence, death, murders, and blood, and again, sexual violence. I just want to make sure, I'm not going to show any images or anything like that, but we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So just want to remind that again. So before we move on, I want to watch a video together. So basically how that's going to work, just to make sure that, we do this in a legit way. We're going to watch the video called, it's a bit of a documentary. It's called The Deadly Messiah, crime documentary. We might not watch it all, but basically we're going to watch it and I'm going to comment as we go. So basically I might pause here and there just to talk about what they're talking about. This documentary is presented from the perspective of some of the cult members who went out, and again, these were people who were victim of Roch and who joined him in the early days. Some of them joined the cult a bit later, and who are going to talk about, what Roch would do. So let's watch the documentary together. I'm going to pause here and there just to provide some commentary. But again, if the subjects that are, in the trigger warning on the screen are things that you don't want to hear about, just, make sure to skip that episode and join us back for, gaming nights, or for next week, where we're going to be talking about the moon landing conspiracy. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Amy, I'm from Montreal, and today we are on our very first Cultify Sunday live stream, just chatting, in the just chatting category, just to chat about cults. And Cultify Sundays will happen every Sunday. We're going to be talking about either a cult, conspiracy theories. We're going to be talking also about urban legends, claims of the paranormal, and other stuff like that. So if that sort of stuff is interesting to you, don't hesitate to join us every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you do not follow yet, don't forget to drop a follow. We're only 6 follows away from 400, so I would love if we can, reach that milestone this week. That would be awesome. But without further ado, let's watch cult leader Roch Maurice Thériault, The Deadly Messiah crime documentary. Again, I'm going to pause here and there just to chat to you about the whole thing. Deadly Messiah.
The end was coming. The end of the world.
They're all French, by the way, so that's why they have an accent.
Judgment Day. Religious leaders throughout the ages have employed the fear of God to bring disciples to their knees, as Roch Thériault did in Quebec in the late 1970s.
So that's why, he had a good reason to make us believe that, we are special and we have to believe that.
First, Gabrielle. So this is Gabrielle. Gabrielle was one of Roch's most loyal followers throughout the whole, length of, the active years of the cult. She was one of his most loyal followers, and he's one of the women who he treated the most awfully. She actually lost an arm. Let's listen.
The lucky one will be
she wrote
saved,
a book.
Saved from the wrath of ancient prophecies, perhaps, but now living in fear of the most punishing cult leader of modern times. Seemingly normal people, complicit in savage mutilations, even the deaths of their babies. As with so many misguided seekers.
Other thing, a lot of kids are born into this cult. Like there's like a lot of kids in this cult. They do get taken away from the cult at some point, so you can find solace in that. However, not without any casualties. Some kids did actually pass because of Roch's not only very criminal negligence, but also just its overall, pleasure for violence and power, and it didn't matter what was the collateral damage of trying to exert his power. If kids and babies were in danger, Roch would not stop to do the things that he was doing just because he did not want to be proved wrong. He did not want to admit that he was wrong. And we're going to see that a couple of times throughout that story. So things will start to get gruesome. I'm just going to say that.
The spiritual journey of Gabrielle Lavallée didn't start out that way. 30 years ago, an entire generation was on the move, turning away from a society they thought was heading in the wrong direction.
People are searching. I mean, you're also looking at a period, 60s, 70s, which were a period of exploration, spiritual, communal lifestyles, and so I think those are factors that come into play. You have the desire to change the world and make the world a better place.
Gabrielle was looking to change the world.
Very true. Again, like I was saying earlier, in the 70s, a lot of people were turning away from from what society was expecting from them, including, at that point, Christianity and Catholicism was very, very, active. They were starting to lose in popularity amongst younger generations who were trying to, try to be more in touch with nature and have a better sense of community, and we're turning away from what society expected from them. So that's why in these years you see a lot of these cults popping everywhere, and people basically kind of using that that mindset that was starting to be more and more common in these years to start their own cults.
Or escape it, and for good reason.
I was deeply handicapped. I was sexually aggressed when I was very young. A traumatism too hard to handle for my age, so I totally obliterated from my memory. But still, the damage was done.
These would be like lost souls. These would be like people who had nobody or maybe homeless or whatever, and here were some people who were willing to help. It was also an age too, where everyone was getting into like guru type of lifestyles and, alfalfa sprouts and, the whole wheat bread. And so they seemed like normal.
Whole wheat bread? What?
If Gabrielle Lavallée was lost,
sorry, that makes me laugh. It's like everybody was getting into, the guru lifestyle and like cults and like whole wheat bread. What's wrong with whole wheat bread? That's so funny.
she also had hope that she would find her way in the nursing profession. But not until she felt more sure of herself.
I was wondering who I really was. I was wondering Earth. I was wondering where I was coming from. And all of that misery you know, that saying to myself, no matter what I touch, everything, you know, becomes a failure. Why?
Oh, I feel for her so
Depressed
much.
nearly to the point of suicide, Gabrielle gravitated to a lecture series run by the Seventh-day Adventists, held at a summer camp north of Toronto.
I said,
I feel so bad for her.
Perhaps there will be a direction for my future, you know, a direction to follow.
She heard a preacher, a man who claimed he was in personal communication with God, a man named Roch Thériault.
That is him. That's Roch.
I felt someone looking at me in such a way that I had the feeling that his look was like transpercing me. I never, you know, felt such a look before. So I asked to one of the people who were with him to fix an encounter, and the sooner the better.
So to come back to that, right? So a lot of the people who join his cult and other cults in general are people like that, right? People who are looking for people with very punchable face, include Roch. Yes, absolutely. Look at this guy. I mean, look at this guy. You know, he's awful. Also, by the way, you're gonna notice later on, like, he never showered himself. Never, ever, ever. He was very sexually charged. He was a very sexually charged man. But he was, you know, not showering. And, you know, he was all about, you know, living the most naturally possible. And so he would not wear any underwear. He would not shower. But he would require women and men in some occasion to perform sexual acts on him. Apparently some, yeah, exactly, yeah. His cellmate, yeah, I saw that earlier. His cellmate did kill him in jail because he's an actual dick. Like, he's a dick, and people who saw through him, you know, hated him. And you're even gonna see, and I don't know if they're gonna talk about this in there, but at some point, Roch Thériault went to meet with what's his face, another cult in Louisiana, I believe, and even that guy from that cult in Louisiana was like, this guy's like too much. You know, when another cult leader from a very problematic cult in Louisiana meets another cult leader and goes like, excuse me, like, I can't handle this guy. Like, he's like, he's like too much for me. Like, you know, this guy is like awful, you know? I don't really care what the other cellmate did. We need to make a Kickstarter to buy that guy a beer or something, right? Oh my god.
People really kind of sometimes have this view
that happened a lot, actually, with these types of people. Like, they get killed in jail.
And in some way, they'll put you totally under their spell, like the kind of image one has of the zombies that are out there. And it's not really like that. I often look at it more as like kind of a love relationship. It's like kind of you fall in love. And you often hear the expression, love is blind. And in many ways, I think there's a process that goes on that is similar to that. It's like, you know,
I agree with that,
wow,
actually.
it's amazing. I've never had this happen.
And they were all in love with
before.
him.
These
They loved Roch.
people. They're involved or care about the same things I do.
Gabrielle listened close.
Like, you have to understand, the thing that people followed was not the faith itself. Like, the beliefs and the values and stuff, they would change constantly. Like, Roch would invent new stuff. Like, he would invent random shit, you know, to add to his power and, like, to, you know, be more powerful and whatever. So, like, people did not follow him because of his faith or his values or whatever. They followed him because they loved him and they believed in him and they trusted him. If he decided one day that this was the truth and this was a lie, like, they would swallow it all. I mean, it wasn't about, you know, even the Adventist teachings or whatever. It was about what Roch was saying, and people were hypnotized by this guy and they loved him so much. And especially the women, like, women were fighting to be on Roch's side. I mean, he was that guy, and he's not like, I mean, I guess, like, physical appearance doesn't really have nothing to do with anything with it, but in the sense that it was not about the fact that he was like the hottest guy on earth. He was just that charismatic. I mean, he did not shower. He probably was probably a very stinky man. And they still loved him. So I mean, he probably had this very, very intense natural talent in bringing people in.
Closely to this charismatic preacher and his vision of opening a healing center. If she didn't immediately volunteer, it wasn't due to any misgivings about him.
I didn't have very much confidence in myself. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't love myself.
She didn't have to, because this guru's outlook was positively infectious.
Well, a lot of people who met Roch thought he was one of the funniest born entertainers they'd ever met.
Perhaps no one has heard more stories about Roch Thériault than investigative journalist Ross Laver.
He would walk into a bar and have people in stitches. He was a prankster. He was kind of a natural-born showman, I suppose you could say. A lot of people became convinced, including professionals, psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, that Roch was a brilliant and kindly man of the Bible.
Okay, other thing, I don't know if they're gonna touch upon that in here, but Roch, he actually had a psychologist who became infatuated kind of like with him, and the psychologist was, you know, a guy with a PhD, and he was a very intelligent, you know, guy who was well respected in the industry and in the field of psychology and everything, and he believed Roch's every words, let's say, and he found him so fascinating. And I can recall the name of that psychologist. I'm gonna try to find it out after in a bit. But wait, let's try to see if I can find it, because this psychologist, I hate that guy. So that guy was the psychologist basically who would basically reinforce what Roch was saying in a way that made it so that, you know, it's like as if Roch had a professional sponsor to basically support his claims. So you have this psychologist, this guy from, you know, academia, who basically supported what Roch was saying, and he was so fascinated with Roch. He was like, this man is the most fascinating thing I've ever seen, and I cannot believe, you know, how much I love him so much, and he's the best. And you know, and Roch would go and consult with him, not because he needed like therapy or anything, but because he would share with that psychologist, you know, the things that he spoke to with God and all that stuff. And that psychologist was like, wow, that is so amazing, Roch. And that is so interesting. And we hate that guy.
Who only meant good.
Good intentions are rarely enough to
there's even a social worker. So again, remember, there was a lot of children in that cult, right? And who lived on the commune where Roch was living. And social workers came multiple times, and even there was an investigator, you know, detectives and stuff like that, who came multiple times to the commune to see what was going on and whether the children were in danger or not, and that kind of stuff. And there was one of the social workers who basically fell into Roch's charm. She never became like an actual member, but she thought that Roch was a very nice man and that he was not doing anything wrong and the children were fine, and like, we're just super judgy because we're judging a religion, and like, you know, that people are allowed to live in a commune if they want. And she was defending the heck out of Roch. And that did not help the case for the children. And it's awful. And like, she's awful. And even after Roch was caught, and even after he went to prison, she was still defending him. And we're talking about someone who is supposed to protect our children here, who was defending him. There was a psychologist who was defending him. There was even lawyers who were defending him. Awful. Just awful. Like, everything that could have went wrong with this cult went wrong. Like, you know, people were in danger, including children, and it's just awful. And people were not caring because he was so charismatic and he was so good at like bullshitting his way through situations that like he would get away with everything, including murder. Like in some situations he would get away with murder because people believed him, including detectives, social workers, psychologists, and criminologists. And like, it's awful because people could have been alive if the authorities took, the complaints from, neighbors and from ex-members, who went to see the police, and the police did not believe them. And even when they went to like verify, he would just bullshit his way out of every situation. And it's so frustrating because I think a lot of people could have been saved and this cult could have been dismantled so much earlier, but it took so long before he actually faced justice.
The listener, which is why Thériault had a plan of action.
Roch had gathered around him about a dozen young people. Some of them were, many of them were school dropouts, people not doing anything with their life, looking for some sense of purpose. And Roch wanted to keep them busy.
Yeah, not biased at all, right?
Him, so they set up a natural food clinic, and he sort of presented himself to the public as a homeopathic healer.
Armed with a nursing degree, Gabrielle could assist Thériault, and likewise, his proposed wellness center would allow her to serve others.
Well, he asked me, why don't you become an associate with me? You want to feel yourself useful, you want to be happy. Well, perhaps this is the chance of your life. And I said to myself, yeah, that might be very well the chance of my life.
Mike Kopfeld has heard it all before. He runs InfoCult, a clearinghouse for information on new and strange religious movements.
I actually follow this. InfoCult is a Canadian, basically anti-cult, obviously, group, and I'm in their newsletter just because, obviously, what they do, and I think that's very important work that they do. They send any types of alerts or missing people. They also do like investigative articles about some groups that they think might be cults, and to make sure to look into it. And so they do really, really important work in Canada. If you want to go support them, perhaps give a donation or just sign up to their newsletter. I really recommend it. Their website is quite old looking. It's not a very modern looking organization, but they're still very active, and they do really important work for protecting Canadians from joining cults, and to ensure that people stay educated on the subject, so that things like Roch Thériault cult do not happen again. Because people think that because we're in 2021 that there are no cults. You're wrong. There are still cults. They're still active. There are still problematic people out there who are abusing others and who are using, people's weaknesses to do very, very awful shit.
People who join groups, in the case of Thériault also, have what they see as kind of a conversion experience. Is they meet the group and it's like, wow, this is what I've been looking for. They have this incredible high. And because they feel that they've gotten this incredible high because of the leader, they say, thank you. It's because of him that I was able now to achieve this kind of, sense of self or spiritual awakening. And it's now, thank you, what's my next step?
The step was almost biblical, a journey to remote eastern Quebec to build a commune. They thought they were following their star, but it would become a black hole from which they could not escape.
What he built around us is the worst jail that could ever exist, because we don't see the bars. It's a psychological jail. A total control on our mind.
Every once in a while, someone issues a public warning worth listening to. Gabrielle Lavallee is just such a person. You might say she gave her right arm so that we could avoid the same costly mistake.
If you ever meet a man, we promise you, the heaven on earth, and you think that you will live the most beautiful life, you will reach the nirvana on earth, and you say to yourself, it's impossible. It's too beautiful to be true. Well, yeah.
Gabrielle is wiser now, but in the summer of 1978, she was one of 16 young Quebecers who surrendered everything, even their individuality, to join a religious maverick named Roch Thériault.
Roch made a break, and he packed up all of his meager belongings and all of his sort of ragtag band of young people and headed off into a remote part of the Gaspé Peninsula, and out of nothing built a big log cabin large enough for about a dozen people.
So we were living in tents and getting up very early and to build. And to build very fast because, you know, the Gaspésian winters are very harsh and they arrive quite early also.
My understanding is they were living together as a group and everything was going along quite nicely. And they were like a help you out type of group. Non-smoking organization and therapeutic, you know, healing and like a spiritual group.
Roch, in that period of time, managed to convince his
Experienced
followers
winter
that
one
he
out
was some
yeah,
kind of Latter-day
right?
Moses. And he began to kind of preach to his followers and present himself as some kind of an Old Testament prophet, which gave him an enormous power over the people that had gathered around him.
To the outside observer, of which there were very few, Roch exercised his power to keep Gabrielle and the others working long hours, even when they should have been sleeping.
Not having even time to be able to think about what was really going on there. Because this is a technique that he used that because they don't want us to even to think.
Their diet consisted of nothing much more than the raw vegetables they grew themselves.
So we were like physically breaking down.
People started to throw around a word like a cult. They all seemed to be doing exactly what he says and only what he says.
It's sexual also control. He has a control on sexual.
So just to remind, I think they're going to go into a bit more of the sexual abuse subjects and stuff like that. So if ever these are subjects that are difficult for you, don't hesitate to skip, you know, this part, you know, and join us back for perhaps a more lighthearted stream. But I'm not going to censor the victims' testimonies here, so just be aware of that. And again, you know, if you want to support the channel, don't forget to drop a follow. You know, this really is something that I'm passionate about. I really want to try to expose people to as much, you know, as much as I can when it comes to cults and, you know, things like that, because again, people think that in 2021, you can't be the victim of a cult, and that's ridiculous. There are modern day cults. We've seen it with Nexium, which we're probably going to cover in about 2 or 3 weeks. Cults are still a thing, and I think that victims who come forward to talk about, you know, their experience are extremely courageous, and I think that they deserve to have their voices heard. And this cult is strangely not that known. Maybe it's because it's Canadian, I don't know, but not that many people are talking about it, so you know, that's why I decided to talk about it. There are a lot of YouTubers who talked about it in like a couple of podcasts, but yeah, disable to any good cult is the corn, right? Yeah. Hey Slummy, how are you? How are you, Slummy? You're coming in a very dark part of this podcast. We're actually listening to a couple of the Roch Thériault's cult victims who are coming forward with their story, and they're very courageous. And I just wanted to talk about this cult because I think that it's important to tell these stories to ensure that perhaps, even if this helps perhaps one person in the world to be wary of joining a cult, and to, you know, take care of themselves and to, you know, perhaps avoid the worst, then I think that's important. But I just want to remind that this particular podcast today is very dark, and has, you know, subjects that are very sensitive and that can be difficult for some people. For example, Dorian was here earlier and decided to skip on this one, and that's totally fair. You know, we're talking about things that are pretty deep and pretty difficult, so just a trigger warning about that. You know, if you're sensitive about these subjects, and you know, you'd prefer to join back on a more lighthearted Cultify Tuesday, what did I say, Tuesday? Cultify Sunday. Next week we're gonna cover the moon landing conspiracy theories, which is a bit more lighthearted than this one.
sexual life also.
Roch was also brilliant.
How are you
at,
recovering from your 24 hours,
setting
Slemmy?
up a kind of a competition among his quote-unquote wives and followers. So he might decide to make this particular woman his favorite for a few days. And the other...
So, yeah, and that's a very, 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 very important part of how, like, it never happened. And that's a very important tactic that Roch used over and over and over again. So, obviously, the majority of the cult members were... So, the commune, I would say, I think at its most was, like, not even 30 members. So we have to remember, this is a very small cult. So it had about 30 members, most of which were women. And most of the children were Roch's children. I think there was a couple of children who were the other guys' children, but mostly Roch, because obviously he saw himself as this powerful patriarch, and he was the one to be basically having the babies and being the father of these babies. However, we noticed later on that he actually did not like having the children on. So when the children did get taken away, that actually made it easier for Roch to exert his power, because a lot of the children that got taken away, they got it taken away from their mothers who were Roch's followers, and they were at their most vulnerable at that point, having their children taken away from them. And so it was even easier for him to control them and to turn them away from society, because we're like, society took your kids, like, so for him that was even something that was beneficial for his cult, because he could use that as another point of putting his claws into people, because like they got their kids taken away, from social workers and stuff like that. And yeah, you're gonna see it's awful.
Others would immediately respond by trying to ingratiate themselves.
Military generals
Food coma set in.
He
What did you
split his
eat?
tribe into two groups, with one of them clearly his favorite.
I was in the second group, the low-class group. We don't have no right to say anything, to be against anything. We have to accept what is going on, no matter what. And if you don't accept, what are you going to be punished?
Worked, starved, ostracized, ignored. Roch's disciples quickly discovered that their utopia...
So here, again, I want to add. So he would do this a lot, right? He would basically change. He would, like, rotate who were his favorites in the cult, because that way people... So he would starve them, right? And he would make sure that they were sleep deprived, that they were lacking proper nutrition and stuff like that. And when you are lacking the basic human needs, right, of sleep, shelter, sleep, food, like, you start to want to do anything to get that stuff. So, like, people would fight between themselves to be on Roch's better side, because they wanted to have more privileges. And they're so infatuated with the cult and Roch, and they are certain that they're doing this to save themselves from Judgment Day, that, like, for them, it's like, we need to go through this to find solace, later on, and that, we're not going to die when the end of the world comes to Earth, right? And they are so deprived of everything that they are ready to do anything to get food, to get sleep, to get any sort of comfort, whatsoever. And so he would do that a lot, right? So he would play this game of, like, carrot on a stick, to say, like, hey, if you want to do this, you need to do that. And, like, so he was very good at manipulating people like that and making sure that they were deprived of even the most basic human needs, so that they were ready to do anything to get those things. Butter chicken, but made with ground beef and into a spaghetti type dish. That's interesting. That's original. That was probably good.
But they had no choice but to keep it to themselves.
Because the thing is, you're not getting people who are standing up in the middle of a session and saying, excuse me, Roch, I don't tend to agree with the kind of position we're taking.
What happens when you eliminate the social norms that govern everyday reality? For one thing, it becomes a jungle out there where the weakest among us die.
Look at our world and just tilt it over, I say, a few degrees over, and they're functioning with a logic within their own reality system. It's then a question of understanding what's their reality system, because there's an internal logic to the group. It just from the outside obviously looks hard to understand. One former member, I remember, told
That's
me...
a very good point, actually. That's a very good point, because when we look into this stuff, right, it's very easy for us to look at this and be like, how did this happen? Like, why did these people not just leave? You know, like, that's a very common question. Why did they just leave? Like, they had families out there. They had people who were going to be waiting for them with arms wide open, like, who are missing them and who just want them back into their homes and their families and stuff. And why didn't they just leave? And we don't necessarily have all the answers for that. Like, when you're, you know, and submit to the same conversation that we have sometimes when we're talking about people who are stuck in abusive relationships, for example. Like, why didn't she just leave? Or why didn't he just leave? Like, when you're in that situation, when you're, you know, in a very, very emotional relationship and a very passionate relationship with someone who is playing that carrot stick game of, like, treating you extremely badly, but then, you know, showing you their sweet side. Oh. Thank you for the subscription, S&J. 3 years.
S&J just subscribed. 3 years. Oh,
yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for the subscription. My most loyal and longest follower and subscribers. By the way, I put you as a VIP member of the channel because you've been with us for so long. How are you, S&J? So yeah, so basically, you know, it's like, it's easy for us to be like, why didn't they just leave? But like, it's when you're not in that situation, it's really hard to put yourself in their shoes, right? Like, when you're in that situation where someone will treat you badly, but then right afterwards they will show you their good side to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, like, I feel so bad that I did that to you, and like, you know, I love you, and you know, they love bomb you. And Roch would do that a lot with people. He would love bomb them and like really treat them so well for like one night, right? And then the night after he would treat them super badly. And then after we'd be like, I feel so bad for doing that. And he would say like, oftentimes what he would do is that when he would like act violently, or, you know, whatever that we're going to get into later, he would then after say to his followers, and he would hold these like talks, or like not talks, but like sermons, where he would say like, God is making me do these things and I feel so bad, and like, you know, I feel awful that God is asking me to do these things. And he would basically blame God, you know, for what he has done, right? And he was like, oh, it's, you know, God is so cruel sometimes, but we have to do this and I feel so bad and it's not my fault, and and like, yeah, so it was a mess.
Interesting way of analyzing Thériault. You came to know when you could do certain things or how he would behave. And she told me it all depended on the weather. And, you know, so what do you mean by the weather? Well, when it was nice, he was in a good mood. And when it wasn't nice, or it was raining, or the weather was bad, he drank. And when he drank, you never knew what he would do.
Yeah, and that goes back. So that goes back to when he started to drink again. So Roch was a very, very, very heavy drinker, and when he would drink, it was when shit went down the most. He was almost uncontrollable, and he would be at his most violent when he would drink. And he would either blame it on God or blame it on the alcohol, but he would obviously never blame himself or take accountability for anything. Yeah.
Wrote an expose about Thériault called Savage Messiah, in which he examines Roch's childhood for signs of a latent killer.
His father was a very, very militant conservative Catholic, belonging to a sect called the White Berets. And partly as a result of that, Roch grew up hating the Catholic Church, and he became attracted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in part because the Seventh-day Adventist Church stressed a lot of things that Roch had started to become very interested in, like natural foods.
So again, here, Roch is not the only one during that time that was growing tired of Catholicism and other Christian denomination. During the 70s and the 60s, 70s, 80s, like there was a big again in the younger generations a big revolt towards society's standards and religious standards included, and so a lot of people were turning away from that and trying to find other ways to be spiritual and to feel a sense of, you know, spirituality in their lives. And so that's why a lot of these cults were, you know, kind of like popping everywhere. And that's why you see a lot of these cults like the Jim Jones Order, the Solar Temple, all that sort of stuff. A lot of these cults were born during that time.
Cessation of smoking, no drinking, and so on and so
forth. A lot
of
the doomsday cults as well.
He was recruited by the church in part because he proved to be an absolutely brilliant salesperson. And so he very quickly emerged as kind of one of their star door-to-door salesmen and evangelists.
Yeah.
But church officials soon became uncomfortable with his magnetic personality and with the crowds that this upstart was attracting to his sermons.
He said that he had gifts, that he met God, he experienced God in his life, and he had visions, and as he was very bright, he was able to really he was able to avoid any suspicion from me.
Oh yeah, and like a lot of gurus and like cult leaders and stuff, like he would fake like healing sessions. So like, for example, he would like work with people to like fake that like he like healed their cancer, or like he healed their disability, or like all that sort of stuff, right? So like, for example, someone would say that they had cancer and that cancer was like healed by Roch's magical powers, you know, or like that, for example, someone who, I don't know, was born with, you know, someone who was paraplegic, for example, and like said, you know, oh, now I can walk because of Roch's magical hands, you know, and like, so people would believe him because there were like these weird like moments where I don't recall exactly those stories. Like we can probably check it out a bit after, but like there was a few of these situations where like he would fake that he healed people, or like say that he brought people back from the dead, like that girl earlier, like we said, who had cancer, and like she was taken away from the hospital to go live at the at Roch's clinic, and she died, right? And like Roch said that he kissed her and that she came back to life, but that God told him that it was time for her to go, so he let her go. And people believed him, and you know, that happened.
I really believe.
Roch's disciples weren't alone in mistaking him for a man of God.
At one point, at the urging of the parents of a number of Roch's followers, he was taken into custody, taken to a major hospital in Quebec City, and held for a psychiatric examination. When that examination ended, the head of psychiatry at the hospital called a news conference in the hospital and told the media that Roch Thériault was a shining example of kind of a back to the land, a wonderful man, a man of God, and it's such a terrible thing that the police would be subjecting him to this.
So that's the guy I'm talking about earlier. So this guy is the head of psychology in one of the most renowned hospitals in Montreal, and this guy is holding a freaking press conference to say that Roch was this wonderful man who was the prime example of trying to get back to, you know, nature's roots, and that he was a wonderful man, and that the police was harassing him for no reason, and that we should, you know, be happy that a man like that is part of society, and that he's doing great things, and that, you know, he was sent to this guy to get a psychological evaluation and get a psychiatric evaluation, and this man, this freaking man who is the head of psychology in a hospital, held a freaking press conference to tell people that Roch was wonderful and that he's fine and that we should totally believe him, and that, you know, he's a prime example of the perfect human, basically. And so if you were someone who was doubting Roch, for example, or maybe perhaps was on the verge of like quitting the cult, or that, you know, you're not sure, maybe you were someone from the public who was weary from the cult, but you weren't necessarily sure because, you know, you don't know, like nobody's talked about it or whatever. And then you have the head of psychology who's like basically endorsing what Roch is doing. Excuse me? And like at that point, that's not at the point where we're aware yet that like there was obviously a lot of information missing that perhaps this person did not have, you know, to support what Roch was doing. But again, if you're the head of psychology and, you know, I feel like this is an utter lack of professionalism and almost criminal negligence to go on air and say this stuff when obviously you have no idea what actually happens in this commune, and you didn't talk to members, you didn't talk to people who left the cult. Like this man just like straight up talked to Roch alone and went on to the media to say that he was a wonderful man and that nothing was wrong and that the police was harassing him and that it was awful what they were making, you know, Roch go through because, you know, they were judging him for his religion or they were judging him for his faith or judging him for his lifestyle. Like, come on.
Harassment.
The hospital staff didn't just believe in Thériault.
That's a
They
yikes,
sent
yeah.
in a mental patient
That's a hella
to
yikes.
recuperate in his Gaspé Garden of Eden. Roch put him in charge of the children. But who was looking out for him?
Apparently the baby that he was looking after, one of them, would not stop crying. Cried and
Okay.
cried and cried.
Before we get into this is an awful story that they're about to talk about. So I'm just warning you. Like I said, there are people who die during in this cult. There are people who died, and people who died included children, and in this case, an infant. So I just want to say that up front. That's what they're going to talk about.
And he beat this child to make it stop crying. Well, he beat it into a coma. And when Roch and the women came back,
it's
I don't know
awful.
what they did to him, but Roch's decision on how to make this baby better was to circumcise him.
Nurse Gabrielle must have seen to
Okay. So during the active years of Roch's reign, let's say, Roch actually did surgeries at multiple occasions. He did surgeries to heal like intestines, illnesses. He circumcised people against their will. I think someone had a kidney infection. He tried to, you know, so he did a lot of these surgeries, and he basically claimed that he was someone who was able to perform surgeries and stuff like that. So he did that. Yes, he conducted the actual surgeries, and Gabriel, who was one of the followers, was a nurse, not a doctor. No, he performed the surgeries.
to everyone the obvious choice to perform the operation, but not to Roch Thériault.
He really thought that he was gifted, that God gifted him, you know, of that ability to do operations.
This makes me so angry. Like, this makes me so angry.
When Roch, you know, played the doctor, it was Frankenstein.
Exactly.
The baby
This makes me
died
so
on
angry.
Dr. Frankenstein's kitchen table, not from loss of blood, but from alcohol poisoning, poured down its little throat as an anesthetic. Roch then decided to operate on the mental patient. The misfit escaped, but not before Roch had castrated him. Thériault was arrested on charges relating to the death of the child and the castration. He was
And just to let you know, he did not go to jail for that.
convicted of criminal negligence and sent to jail.
Uh,
As for the commune,
I lied. He went to jail for that, but I can recall that's not the end of the cult. Like he came back after that.
It was ordered to disband.
And to think that they regrouped again, and more children died and more women were killed. It's just... But they actually duped people. They made people believe that they were just wanting to have this nice little lifestyle.
I feel awful.
For two brutal
I feel so
operations,
angry when I
which he was entirely unqualified to perform.
read about this stuff.
The homeopathic guru,
And he
who called
is a
himself
huge
Moses,
piece of shit.
found himself behind bars. David Wolfe is an expert on sociopathic behavior, the kind that allows a person to suffer delusions of grandeur.
It's what we call megalomania. It's a real belief that you have all the answers. So there's definitely a personality disorder in there. That's something it's, usually started in childhood. Our best understanding of such individuals is they grew up typically in very controlling households. Someone who has a lot of charismatic features, but also a healthy dose of paranoia and suspicion, and wants to lead people to believe that if you drop the old way of looking at the world and take on my view, that you'll really see the light.
For the next 14 months, Thériault could only shine his eerie light from prison. Some commune members decided 4 years of abuse were enough and fled. But the rest of the family, including Gabrielle, remained mysteriously under his spell.
And Roch was phoning us very often from the jail, and even me, of the second group, the low class group, saying that I was special and everything, and that he loved me so much. And then when we leave the jail, it will be totally different than it was before. We're going to live in peace. We're ready for that step, and saying that we're all very a great human being.
I wonder how long he stayed in jail for that. Says because he went to jail. He didn't stay in jail for very long, and that's the thing that is really crazy to me, because what he did was really awful. Like, it's not just criminal negligence. Like, you operated on an infant, a very gruesome operation, surgeries, and which resulted in a baby dying, and I'm trying to see how long he went to jail for. That's what's annoying, is that there's not that much information on let's see if I find jail. 9 months. Yeah, okay, so blah blah blah. Marie Solange, 6 months in prison for child abandonment. Yeah, so I think yeah, okay, so I think that okay, so he was sentenced to 2 years less a day. 2 years less a day for what he did.
And don't leave him. So that's why the group stayed together.
That's nothing. What?
When Thériault was released, a dozen hardcore believers were prepared to give their master
for not only being violent on an infant, and then afterwards doing a circumcision on the infant with no license whatsoever, and putting him under anesthesia with alcohol, and then the baby actually dying on his operation table, but also castrating a man without consent. And
another chance.
I can't.
They headed west to Ontario, into dense bush country north of Toronto. Here was a place even more remote, 4 miles away from the nearest town of Burnt River, where screams would surely never be heard.
Did he plead guilty? Did he plead guilty? Wait. At the end of the 9-month trial, during which the commune member moved to the town of New Carlisle while the trial was held, our parties were found guilty of all charges. Thériault was a security risk. They found a child's remains. No one questioned. It's not. It doesn't say. But yeah, and that guy that he castrated was a guy that complained about like you know, I think he had heartaches or something. Wait, have you lie on a table? Yeah, so he castrated this guy. Anyways, like, it is a short sentence. Like, it makes no sense. I don't understand. But you have to understand, even lawyers were I wonder what kind of deals made the crown. Yeah, exactly. And like, also, again, if the head of psychology from like one of the most respected Montreal hospital was supporting this guy, perhaps he was able to dupe a lot of the, you know, investigators and like lawyers and even the judge into, you know, being, I don't know. I don't know.
Our sleeves and work and work and work to build up in a matter of no time. It's incredible.
Gabrielle would soon be forced to endure worse torture than hard work. The 2 children she had by Roch were taken from her to be raised by his favored women.
Not being able to love my children. That was
the
worst.
Nothing he did, right? Roch had like 2 groups in his cult, right? He had one group that he favored a bit more. Like, everybody was treated like shit, but he had one group that he favored a bit more and one group that he treated like absolute scum. When he had children with the group that he did not like, he would take the children away and say like, no, your kid is going to be raised by this woman. So isn't that awful? And isn't that a way to really manipulate these women into doing whatever the hell he wants, because they just want to see their kids and they just want to hold their kids in their arms, and like, yeah, it's awful.
Thing that a man could have done to me. He could have killed me. If God did not give me that spiritual strength, I would have never be able to go through that. Impossible. Impossible.
Roch, as I say, just seemed to be kind of a natural born manipulator of people, somebody who knew instinctively how to break down somebody's defenses, want them to follow him, and do exactly what he said.
Just awful.
Why would a dozen seemingly sane people volunteer themselves into slavery? Our impulse is to call them all crazy. But Mike Kopfeld suggests that's too easy an answer.
Absolutely. I agree with that guy.
Kooks, because they aren't.
I agree.
As strange or, you know, weird as it may be perceived by the outside, I think it does, you know, I think it's a totally wrong track to take to start with believing that these people are just, you know, crazy.
I agree with that.
Deprived of her children, Gabrielle would rationalize it as part of a greater logic, a sacrifice that they were all making for God.
Thinking of even leaving this is like, you know, going back to what? The humdrum of everyday life. Here I am, part of God's force that's creating a better world or trying to create a better world. What can be better than that?
Manson had a very similar dynamic. He did the same thing. He just mixed in drugs as a spiritual thing.
It's interesting to me that they compare to the Manson's family, to Charles Manson, because it's interesting because Charles Manson had about a same size cult as Roch, and you know, Charles Manson is known as like one of the most awful, you know, guys from, you know, modern history, you know, and you know, there was countless movies made and TV shows and documentaries, and so much stuff was made about Charles Manson, probably in part because he was very active in the Hollywood scene, and that, you know, he and the Manson family killed Sharon Tate, who was a very successful actress at the time. But it's crazy to me that a cult like Roch, Thériault, and the Anthill Kids did not get more coverage, just because I think that what happened under Roch's reign is, I mean, all cults are bad, right? And all of this is awful, and what Manson did is awful and disgusting. But the shit that happened in this cult is like, you think it's already the worst, and you're like, oh, it can't get any worse than that, and it does. Like every single time, every time you think, oh, it doesn't get worse than that, it does. Like it always does. Like this is scratching the surface here.
Converted to his way of looking at the world, and that is, they're the enemy. If you tell other
I don't know if
people,
it's because it's like a French Canadian cult or something. Like people are just not aware.
From me. Your kids will be taken.
But
your life,
yeah.
as you know, it will be destroyed. I'm keeping that at bay, so they become all powerful.
The sacrifice became almost too much for Gabrielle. The day her own child could not be consoled.
At one point, either to punish Gabrielle or to punish this baby for crying, Roch ordered that the child be left wrapped in a flimsy blanket in a wheelbarrow outside. It was the middle of winter. The temperature was -10 or -15 degrees, and left there for several hours. When the child was next checked, it was dead.
Obviously. So that's what I'm saying. Like, this shit, like, you can't make this shit up. Like, this guy was a literal monster, and like, and I see people covering like Charles Manson over and over and over and over, and it's like, when are people gonna talk about this? Like, I see like YouTubers and like, you know, people in the podcasting world talking about this story, but like, I haven't seen in mainstream media. Like, I've seen like local documentaries like this, you know, like made in Canada, and like, and this is more of like a local story. But like, how in the hell? I'm thinking this can't get any worse. Documentaries like Hold My Beer, exactly. Like, it's, how in the hell is this not something that this, like, and these victims in, like, not only in this documentary, but like these victims, right, who lost children, who, there are people who died, like not only children but also like other members who passed and who were killed and who were, you know, operated on in the most awful of circumstances. And some of these people still found the courage and the strength to come and talk about their stories and really expose this man for who he was. And nobody is giving them the mic. Like, I don't understand it.
The official explanation was crib death. The authorities bought it, so why shouldn't Gabrielle? To save her sanity.
My son died in 1985, January 26, 1985, from crib death syndrome at the age of 5 months and 12 days. And I'm sure that he died from that because I have all the medical paper concerning his death.
You know, you want to think he's crazy, but it was also, there was intent, and he knew what he was doing. Part of the craziness is to capture it in that mystical belief that I have these powers, and also to make it difficult for others to understand.
By the way, for this child's death, right, like she said, all the medical papers say that he died of crib death syndrome, which is something that can happen sometimes in newborn babies. But obviously, that's not what happened. I mean, you leave a newborn child in the cold, in negative temperatures, like, obviously that child is going to die. Like, that, it's not rocket science. Like, come on. Like, and again, he was able to bullshit his way out of it, and to convince everybody involved that this was just crib death syndrome.
And only you understand my powers. and know how powerful I am. And so that creates that whole mystery around the person.
Roch kept fathering children with his 8 concubines. If the kids were exceptionally well...
How many kids did he get? 22 children. Okay, he has 26 children. Yeah. 26 children.
His methods of disciplining them might explain why.
According to some of the people who were there.
Three of the children went on, I think, it was just a few years ago. They went on a talk show called Tout le monde en parle, which is everybody talks about it. It's like a show that's every Sunday where various people go there. It's just like a talk show where you have celebrities go in there. You have journalists or whatever to talk about their stories, and every guest has like it's a long format show. I think it's like a 2-hour show. And it's just people basically around a table who don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. Some of them are like a singer. Sometimes you'll have like a singer, you'll have an actress, you'll have a journalist, you'll have someone from again, like a cult survivor who's there, and they all talk with each other. It's a really interesting format. I actually really enjoy watching it. So anyway, so 3 of Roch Thériault's children, 3 boys, who are men now, went to talk about their stories on the show.
He might take that child, hold it up against a tree trunk, and drive in knives.
Obviously, a lot of them don't remember much because they were very young when they were taken away. But
and then go to the mother of that
just knowing that you're the child of such a man is very intense in itself. So yeah, but
then say, I want you to throw these rocks at your children. And if she refused to do it, he would threaten to hurt the child even worse.
Because of their remote location, Thériault could continue his campaign of terror with impunity. But that very same isolation...
Let me just add in the trigger warnings, actually. I'm gonna add... Like, I feel like I just need to do a trigger warning. Like, trigger warning, everything. Yeah, exactly.
was piquing the public's curiosity about who these gentle people were.
I was a journalist working for the Fenelon Falls Gazette. And I had just been sent by my publisher to cover a story. He wanted to find these people who everyone was talking about in the community, this group who had moved on to this acreage out in the middle of nowhere, and no one seemed to be able to find them. So he made it my job to find them.
Most of the press coverage that they got was extremely favorable because, of course, when they would visit, Roch would be on his best behavior. If they had a visitor at the commune,
do they have the?
They would always put on a big banquet.
I forgot to put that on. I'm
dinner,
sorry.
Lots of food. So, of course, nobody had the impression that people were being starved or mistreated. Would look to the outside world as if not only were they being well fed, but also that they were growing their own food, they were baking their own bread. This sort of picture of this alternative community really appealed to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And that's very true. And again, in these years,
Debbie Villacca found herself in densely wooded country without a compass.
There was no apparent entrance to the property. Nobody really knew exactly where the entrance was. So I went out one day and just sort of scouted along the concession lines and started to follow in a few of the like logging roads. I had gone in quite a while and I was just walking. All of a sudden, shots were fired and bullets were hitting the trees above where I was walking. And so I just sort of like crouched down to the ground and I started hollering like, hey, you know, there's people here, there's someone here. My reaction when it happened, it wasn't like fear, it was anger. And it was like, hey, you know, quit shooting. But then my second reaction was, this is crazy. I gotta get out of here.
This dramatic thing. Very bad man.
For
Okay.
reporter Debbie Valaka, a feel-good story about a band of holistic Christians living on the land had suddenly turned into a dangerous assignment. She returned to the bush country north of Toronto, this time in a four-wheel drive vehicle, accompanied by another reporter.
So we, you know, followed these old farmers' logging roads and went over creeks.
Yo, Debbie is an
and,
MVP, I swear. Debbie is the best in this
bush,
thing.
And by the time we actually reached the settlement that they were in, it was dark.
They
Debbie
were
is
met by
like
two of
one
Roch's
of them
women
who
weren't
spoke
expecting
out,
guests
spoke
for
up
dinner.
a lot.
They were very agitated. Like they were not weak women at all. They weren't saying, you know, oh, what are you doing here? You know, they were like, what are you doing here? Who are you?
They issued a warning that Roch would be upset, but Debbie didn't flinch. She had questions that needed answers. Escorted into the main building, Debbie encountered 12 young children sitting at a long table.
It was silent. There wasn't a sound. They didn't fidget. They didn't talk. They didn't cry. Like, it was very odd. And then Roch came in.
As he began speaking, Debbie had only one thought on her mind.
How is it possible that this man has convinced all of these women to live with him as his wives and to have all of these children?
But her interview would have to wait, while he continued speaking in grandiose metaphors.
He was very philosophical. He said, if you go downstream, he said the waters are muddy, and from people walking through it and drinking from it and messing it up. He said, but by coming to the source of the river, he says that the water is clean. And he said, by coming to the source, you've come to me, and so you've come to the truth. I thought it was like, this is like a con man. That was my, you know, reaction to it. Like, this is how a con man would talk to you.
Yeah.
Roch sermonizing.
She's an MVP. Like, this woman, from the first time she was exposed to this place, she started to really be like, hey, like, we need to do something about this. And she, throughout this whole story, continued to go back and to try and check on the children and try to gather evidence that the children were not safe. Because obviously, so here's the thing that sucked, right? Sometimes with justice and the law and everything, it's like you need to have proof, right? And suspicion and just like things that on the surface look odd or whatever are not enough to take the children away from their moms and their dads. So she and the people who were in with her had to find a way to prove that those children were in danger and that they needed to be taken away. Yeah, so you're gonna see, but Roch hated that woman with a passion.
May have mesmerized his disciples, but it only made Debbie more anxious to speak up.
And I asked him about having 7 wives. And he said that they were not wives in the conventional sense. They weren't married. He basically said the relationship was the women love me and I love them. And it's an agreement. And babies come. It's only natural.
It may have been natural, but to Debbie, his explanation wasn't sincere.
He wasn't like serious. Do you know what I mean? If you're having a serious conversation with somebody and they're just direct and they say, you know, I'm glad you've come to talk to me because now I can tell you the straight story. He wasn't like that.
The reporters were politely escorted back to civilization. But for cult members who wanted to leave, it wasn't that simple.
You were isolated. It wasn't just easy like packing your bags or slipping out in the middle of the night and just disappearing. It was hard to get away, physically hard. And
yeah, because they were so remote. They were like deep in the woods.
In the middle of the winter, you're not just picking up and walking out. You know, in some cases, it was hard to go anywhere, let alone thinking of leaving.
One concubine did manage to escape and reported Roch's
Yeah, they were
brutality.
trapped, totally.
Authorities
Totally
stormed
trapped.
the place and removed most of the children. If adults thought their lives were in danger, and they were, they didn't say a word.
As the social workers went around from person to person, they were told, if you want your child or your children, you simply have to come with us, leave Roch, Thériault, leave Moses, and you'll be allowed to
He
keep
called
your
himself
children.
Moses. Like, what?
But if you decide to stay with Roch, then your child will be put up, or your children will be put up for adoption.
Yeah.
Not a single mother left Roch. They stayed with him.
So they glanced over that pretty quickly, but it took a while to be able to find the proofs and the evidence to be able to take the children away. And they were able, I believe they were able to take all of the kids except a couple of the older ones. But yeah, and none of the women left. And the reason is pretty simple. I mean, Roch was very good, again, at manipulating people and saying, like, hey, these people are your enemies. These people are our enemies. And they just want you to turn away from God, and they're taking your children away, and they're lying to you, and don't listen to them, you know, like, they're just trying to manipulate you. Like, he would gaslight you into oblivion, like, to the point where you were just numb to whatever was happening. And he would convince you that the authorities and the social workers, they were just there to hurt you and to turn you away from God and to manipulate you and harm your family and stuff, and that it was all a scam, and that, you know, so that's why they didn't leave. I mean, it's not because they were, you know, they didn't care about their children, because many of them have come out, you know, afterwards to talk about their stories. And it's not that they didn't care about their children. It's just that for them, it's like they thought doomsday was coming. They thought the world would end and that they needed to do this to save the freaking world. And if not being with their kids, that's what it took to save the world. Like, imagine being in that state of mind of like, okay, like, I'm not gonna have my kid, but I'm gonna like save the world. Like, when you believe that, when you truly believe that in your core, it's like, I'm gonna live with the pain of not being with my kid, but like, if, you know, we can prevent doomsday, that's like worth it, right? Anyways,
we have to keep in mind that most people would look at this externally and think, why wouldn't you say something? Why wouldn't people do anything? Why wouldn't you rebel? Well, that's often because gradually, little by little, that's been stripped from you.
Exactly.
The feeling you even have a choice.
At that time, we were not human beings anymore. We even cannot think properly, because what you go through is fear.
Also, remember, again, they are deprived from the most basic human needs. Like, they are barely eating, they're barely sleeping, they're cold, they are being abused, they are being humiliated. There are stories in this thing of people being forced to eat their own feces in front of everyone because of talking back or that kind of stuff. So your brain does not function properly when you're deprived of water, when you're deprived of food, when you're deprived of sleep. Like, there's all of that, you know, all of these things on top of slowly, being, changing your identity, cutting you off from your families and your own communities, being trapped in the woods, so like, you have to remember, like, these are all multiple layers of things that make you become part of this psychological jail, you know, like physically, sure, they could find a way to escape, sure, but the physical escape is one thing, right? That is already difficult because of how remote they are and because of the winters and stuff like that. But the psychological jail is what's the most powerful one in that story.
Fear, second après second, minute après minute, hour after hour, for years.
With his children gone, Roch decided someone had to pay. He singled out a scapegoat, one of his more strong-minded women, Solange Boulard. He dragged her into the forest.
And
okay, again, this is gonna be a very awful story. So just warning you, this is awful. And if you're squeamish about perhaps hearing about violence and abuse and that sort of thing, you can probably skip ahead. Probably not ahead because we're live, but probably go for a snack, go for a drink, and come back.
What I heard, it was a horror. And when she came back, she was, covered with blues and in a very pitiful state. And he told us because the devil was in her, and he had to get rid of the devil in her.
Unconvinced that Solange's spirit had been purged, Roch ordered her to undergo one of his kitchen table surgeries. For Solange, there would be no escape, and no report to authorities. In fact, it wouldn't be discovered for almost a year that Solange Boulard was dead.
What she was going through, she was going through something. I could feel that. I just couldn't describe it because she was, her belly was open. And here she was in that state of calm, of peace. And that really impressed me.
So this woman, it's intense how... So this woman still to this day, right? So, well, this was a couple of years ago that this documentary was made, but... So Solange, so when you read about the story of Solange, so Roch performed an operation on her, said that he needed to clean her soul or something like that, or free her soul, and that he needed to remove, I think it was either her kidney or her liver. It was something about removing one of her organs, right? And he opened her up, and she died, obviously. But the thing is that Solange was so, and again, I'm probably thinking of again, these people are sleep deprived. They're not eating properly. They don't even have the strength to scream most of the time, I'm assuming. And this woman is being opened up alive without any sort of anesthesia, and she's not screaming. She is not screaming. She is not fighting. She laid on that table, and he did what he did, and she died. And yeah, and so strangely, when the other members saw that, they saw that as a proof that her soul was freed, and that, because she found solace, so she didn't scream, and all the pain, and all that stuff was her soul leaving her body, and she was not screaming, she was not fighting, she was just there. And so they were all wow, he really did free her soul. People did not report the fact that she was dead. People did not second guess him. It's this whole weird thing. It's so odd.
How could a spiritual movement descend to such depths of depravity? Mike Kopfeld puts himself in Gabrielle's shoes.
So now if I'm watching you being beaten, I'm sitting there going, phew, I'm glad it's not me. I'm not going, why is she being beaten? And I got to find some way to stop this because this is horrific. I'm going, I'm glad that's not me. And so it's very different. So one is looking at
That's a very
also
good
for
point,
one's own
actually.
interest on one level, at the same time as finding a way to justify that was warranted because she wasn't doing, what God wanted, or she was somebody who was too selfish, or she was somebody who gossiped too much or didn't do
That's a good
what
point,
she
actually.
was supposed to do.
A constant state of denial turned these grown men and women into children, and worse.
We don't have no power, no possibility to think anymore. As I said, we are zombies. We're not human beings anymore.
I mean, yeah.
We're like...
Totally. Yeah, I can see that because, again, they're not sleeping, they're not eating properly, they're living in perpetual cold, they have their children taken away from them, they are being threatened with literally death. Like, so Roch would get drunk, right? And he would operate under the influence of a lot of alcohol, and it was kind of like that Russian roulette of like, who is he gonna torture tonight, basically. Like he castrated multiple men. Like that first guy he castrated other dudes as well. And he operated, I don't remember who he operated for their intestinal issue that they had. Anyways, he operated someone with an intestinal problem at some point. But he would torture or abuse or whatever. Like anytime that he would drink, people would fear for, oh no, I hope it's not me. Like, I hope it's not me tonight. Like, you never knew who would end up on that table. Like, he played Frankenstein, basically.
Zombie.
Now, people assume, well, this is all well planned out. This is not planned out. You see, that's the whole thing that people sometimes forget, is they think that this is, all planned out. But it's a process that goes on, and it's only when we talk about it by stepping back and trying to look at how the group evolves that we can see certain kind of processes going on. And in the case of, let's say, Thériault, you can see that because he could do what he wanted and no one reacted against it, what was to stop him from going further?
Nothing. Not even Gabrielle Lavallée, for whom it did go a lot further.
Gabrielle had been getting on his nerves for some reason. He decided that she needed to be taught a lesson.
Again, we're about to learn about a very graphic story here. So just a warning.
He grabbed one of her hands, forced it down to their big wooden kitchen table, and took a knife and stabbed through the hand, basically sort of crucified her hand to the table.
Believe me, I was sure that I would die that night. I was really certain I would die.
That freaking transition from that show, man, very bad, man.
Over a 12-year
So
period,
dramatic.
Roch Thériault had 22 children with 8 different women. With most of the kids removed from the premises, Roch found other, almost cannibalistic ways to feed his ego.
He was asking to his concubines to write him letters. And we have to praise him, and I had a hard time with that. So we wanted to make an example, saying to the others, if you are stubborn like she is, you're going through what she's going through now.
She was already suffering a broken arm that had become infected.
Well,
He
yeah.
grabbed one of her hands, forced it down to their big wooden kitchen table, and took a knife.
Imagine, like, you get your hand stabbed and then through the table, like through and through, and you're not getting any medical helps. Like, that, it's gonna get infected like 100%.
Stabbed through the hand, basically sort of crucified her hand to the table so that she was unable to move, with this knife going right through her hand.
I saw the whole scene, but I didn't have no feeling, no fear.
Took a carpet knife, sort of those hooked, curved carpet knife, and again, with Gabrielle unable to move, he held her arm and started carving away pieces of the flesh over a period of an hour or two, just carving them away like he was whittling a log or something like that.
What I went through, I was in God's presence. I was surrounded by God's love so much. It was so great what I went through.
Not so.
Yeah. It's I'm like at a loss of word for this, because how do you get to that point, right, where I guess that at that point the only thing that they had was that belief, you know, and that God was there to protect them and to be with them. And so she probably was able to shut herself out of that situation and like just think about the fact that all that's happening to her right now is one step closer to God, and that all that pain and all that suffering and all that stuff was all worth it. And when she talks about it, you can feel that she in a way still, she taps into those feelings and she feels them. And she, like she said here, like, I felt God's love, and it was so great what I went through. I don't think that she means that she had fun and that it was awesome. I think that she just taps back into that feeling of thinking that, like, wow, like when I'm going through, like, all the pain I'm going through must be for something really important, when in fact it's just the doing of a awful man who was a drunk, you know, psychopath, who just was very, very violent, and who was extremely narcissistic. And oh man,
So great that her arm was being brutally amputated, but great that the God she turned her back on 12 years earlier had returned and was speaking to her.
This is when I realized that was the key sentence when he said, I love you. I heard him telling me, I love you. That was the key sentence that helped me to open the psychological jail, to recover my critical judgment, and then to realize that this guy who said was the representative of God wasn't at all. It was the devil. I saw the devil.
That's a good way to put it, right? Like, it's hard to know when you might snap into reality, and like what would trigger that, like she said, like opening the jail's door in her mind, and that for her was when Roch said, I love you. And that's interesting, right? Because you might think that, on the contrary, that would have been a thing that would maybe make her feel better about the situation, but no, she said he was not a representative of God. He was the devil.
Gabrielle survived the mutilation, then waited 19 days for the right moment to escape. It was August 14th, 1989.
That's my freedom day. It's as important as my birthday.
She beat her own trail through dense bush country.
I would probably say that it's more important than her birthday, honestly.
To Burnt River. At the hospital, the doctor thought it was a miracle she was alive. The psychological damage of a dozen years in captivity began immediately to heal.
There were two men, my surgeon and the chief police. They were two very nice human beings that really, really, really helped me. Those men helped me to reconcile with all men. You know, being able to make the difference. That if I had something to blame, it was just a person, not all the men, for what happened to me.
That's so powerful what you just said, right? Like, you could imagine that someone who went through that would be scarred for life, and she's probably scarred for life regardless, but the fact that she was able to work through a lot of that trauma and be able to trust, you know, men again and trust people again. And that's admirable to me. That's admirable. Like someone who went through what she went through and what other people in that cult went through, if, you know, being after leaving, you know, that cult, that, you know, if they were people just tumbling through life, you know, very much struggling in all ways possible, including socially, I would totally understand. I would be like, yeah, makes sense, you know. But the fact that she was able to deal with that in such a powerful way and be able to actually speak to people and speak openly about what happened to her, to me is very, very strong.
The manhunt for Roch Thériault lasted 6 weeks.
And she's the one, yeah, and she's the one ultimately who brought this whole thing down, because when she escaped, that's when when she snapped, she was like, when she snapped back into that logic, right? She was on a mission, right? She was like we need to stop this, like we need to stop, like this guy is evil, this guy, you know. So she worked with the police very hard to try and get him.
3 of his wives remained at his side, but for the others, the spell was broken, and they testified in court against him. Roch was tried for the murder of Solange Boulard and 84 different counts of brutality. The jury found him guilty.
People who do this, men who do this, I know of no treatment.
Yeah.
It was established early and discovered early in adolescence that they were, you know, becoming abusive towards girlfriends and wanted to have their own followers and things, they could probably get help at that point. But someone who is now well into a criminal pattern of this, and given that it's a personality disorder, very difficult to treat. You can only control it by monitoring and perhaps incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like he said, and I think that's a very good point what he said. If you can see signs and catch those signs very early on, perhaps you can prevent a lot of it. But someone who's been like in that state of mind for like well over a decade, I don't think there's any coming back from that. And like he said, probably one of the only way to address it is incarceration, and just very close monitoring in incarceration. I mean, like, I don't think there's any rehabilitation for someone like Roch Thériault. I really don't think so. No.
With Roch Thériault behind bars, people began asking how a man of God could have become so ungodly. Gabrielle blames booze for the decline of Moses.
Even though sometimes he was like regretting what he was doing and become sober again, well, it was just as awful. Even when he was sober, it became worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
Maybe the more important part of this story is why we're all...
I wouldn't blame that on the booze itself. I think the booze did not help. But like she said, he was the same when he was sober, basically. It's just that when he drank, he was very uncontrollable and very unpredictable. I wouldn't blame all of what happened on the booze, though. He was clearly having a lot of issues, regardless of the booze.
Of these people attracted to him in the first place, and how did they become his followers, and why had they stayed together for, at that time, about 12 years?
Often when one looks at groups of this kind, people have often said, well, people were brainwashed. Yeah, I mean, it's really what it goes on. I don't think it's anything magical. So it's not magical in the sense of, like, there's no magical technique where I don't have to look you in the eyes and I zap you and you're gone. It's that process. We can approach, let's say, 100 people and maybe only get 5 or 6 or 7 to become more interested and involved, because the other people we're approaching are saying, well, okay, interesting, but not for me, thank you, goodbye. The same way as you may have the professional con artist that goes, you know, door to door or business to try to defraud somebody. Is he able to defraud everyone? No.
If Gabrielle
That's a
fell
very good
too
point.
easily for the spiritual seduction,
That's a
it
very
was
good
due
point.
to the desire to bring meaning to her life. But even in the early going, she had a feeling that her quest for salvation would have a dark side.
It's like he was able to really look inside of me with this look and see all of my weaknesses. That he said to himself, I'm going to use that to break her down. And I'm sure at that point he said she will be the easiest one to break down.
Gabrielle Lavallée took years to accept the mistake of falling for a false prophet. In the tradition of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, she rose from the ashes to write an expose on Roch Thériault. Writing about her 12 lost years proved to be the best therapy.
Through my writings, I relived that hell again, but allowing my emotions, you know, to really go through all of that, because when I was with Thériault, I just couldn't show my emotions.
She took her book show on the road, to schools and women's groups. Her message was about happiness.
That makes sense.
It is not about there. We have to...
I think that's a really interesting way to put it. Like she said, I relived those emotions, but in a way that I was not allowed to live those emotions while I was with Roch. And that must have been so therapeutic for her, to write about all of this, and to be able to really process everything, one event through the other, after the other. And, you know, really processing what happened to her, because when you're in it, it's really difficult to be introspective and to have an objective view on things, because you're living it, you know, in the moment. So yeah, that's a really interesting way that she put it there. I think that's very interesting.
It's there. Everything is there to fulfill ourselves. So when we reject ourselves, well, our spiritual life, when we decide to live only on a human will, oh la la.
Gabrielle can testify about willpower. It's not always the captain of our fate. As David Wolfe explains, it's not that difficult to convince people to believe in you.
If I wanted to do that tomorrow, I would find something I thought people needed. And it's usually some basic emotion. They need affection and love and attention and resource.
And in Roch's case, one of the first, so if we go back, right, we remember one of the first thing that Roch did that brought followers to him and people to believe in him and trust him was simply offering a way for people to stop smoking. What made this cult become a thing, the very initial efforts to build this group, was quitting smoking workshops. Most of the followers, if not all, joined the cult through either participating in the workshop or hearing about the workshop, which was simply about quitting smoking. And for a lot of the followers, if not all, that quitting smoking workshop was the gateway into joining this cult. Good thing I'm still a smoker. Yes, smooth. Or you could be like me and never have tried to smoke, so you don't need to quit smoking because you've never smoked. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. Like, you know, I've smoked other things, but I have never tried to smoke a cigarette. I think the reason why I've never tried to smoke is just because my mom was such a big smoker, like a very, very much of a smoker. Like, man, I mean, back in the day, you know, people would smoke inside. We would smoke in the restaurant, you know, like people would smoke in cars, you know, like, ugh. And as a kid, my mom is like, I've always knew my mom just like that, having the cigarette like in her hand, like just like that, right? Just, she always had her hand like this, like just like always all the memories I have from childhood, my mom has a cigarette in her hands. And I think for me that like created some type of like blockage in my mind where I was like, I am never touching a cigarette. And like and I struggle very much with like for example in dating, right? Like if I go on a date, for example, with a guy and he's a smoker and he has to leave every like 5 minutes because he needs to go smoke, I'm like, ugh. Because to me it's like I go back to that place in my mind where like my mom would just like grab a smoke one after the other, and it's like no matter what we're talking about, no matter what's happening, no matter, you know, you could be assisting someone's birth or something, like you need to go out and take a smoke. Like fuck, like can we just, you know, talk and live in the moment and just, it's like that cigarette becomes the most important thing for you. Like, oh my god, I can't handle it. And also I hate the smell. I don't even care if someone is like a social smoker, like, you know, kind of smokes here and there. But if someone is the type of guy that cannot not have a cigarette in his hands, like I can't. Like, I hate the smell. I hate the taste. Like kissing a guy that just had a smoke is vomit inducing for me. It's also like $17 a pack now. True. It's also very expensive. It's an expensive bad habit that has no health benefit. Like it's very expensive, and it feeds that addiction that you have to the nicotine, but there's no like health benefits to smoking.
And I would provide that to
I
them.
look cool.
I would little by little block out the other
Do you
stuff that
though?
they have and convince them that
Do
this is
you
better.
though?
And one day they'd wake up and realize they're totally controlled by it but can't get out.
Roch Thériault has served 15 years behind bars and is now eligible for parole. But he recently declined a hearing. He said he fears for his life if set free. For
Joke's on him. He was stabbed in prison.
Gabrielle, life has never been better, especially since finding the daughter she lost to adoption.
I never thought I would see my daughter again. I was sure I would never see her again. So, in 1989, August 14, I leave for good, and then I make sure to contact her adoptive family, and as they are great human being with a great heart, they allow me to see her again.
Oh.
Gabrielle was anxious that her 6-year-old daughter might be traumatized by painful memories.
Oof.
But I have to play strong.
That makes me emotional.
That was not easy. Very, very, very emotional. When I arrived at her place, finally, when I gave up clothes and a teddy bear, I just, you know, like embrace her adoptive mother, and I allowed myself to cry there.
Oof. Oh, I'm crying. Oh. I don't have any Kleenex. Man, I can imagine, like, you know, like you get your kid taken away, you know, from you, and after choosing to stay in the cult and everything, and like, man, and the fact that this family was, you know, willing to, they could have very much said no, like, no, absolutely not, you know, like, knowing the story behind why she was put up for adoption and everything, like, they could have very well said, like, hell no, like, you're not gonna see your daughter, like, you're, you know, some people see people like her and say, like, you're a crazy woman, like, why did you even join that cult for that long, and like, you know, you're awful. And oh man, this woman is pretty strong-minded after living through this. Yeah, absolutely, she is stronger than I ever will be. Like, man, wow. Sorry about that. That hit home. Not even because I relate to any of this, but just because, I don't know, man, there's something about kids, you know, and like parents. I don't know, I just feel, man.
Tears of gratitude that helped Gabrielle come to terms with a memory of one very bad man.
There's always a bit of light in the darkness, and we have to kind of hope on that to get out of that of darkness.
And she's
because
so
there
well
is
spoken
always
and so
light
calm
at
and
the end of the tunnel.
so hopeful.
Over human misery, always. Never give.
How do you have this type of like mindset on life after what you've been through, you know? I mean, I guess it does make sense because she was able to see the worst of what humanity has to offer and come out of it. So I guess that thinking back, I think it probably actually makes sense that she's like that, just because she was able to, you know, when we say someone who goes through hell and back, like she went to hell and back. Like if she went through all of that and was able to find peace and happiness afterwards, that's the proof that whatever we go through, you know, is not necessarily the end. Like misery and pain doesn't have to be permanent, and you can get through it, and she's the proof of that.
Give up. Never, 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 never give up.
Man. Wow. Wow. Oh man, that got me emotional right there. So that was Roch, Thériault and the Anthill Kids. I will go back into a few things though, because they did gloss over a couple of things, especially the whole investigation for the children and the social workers, and how they were able to take the children back and put them up for adoption, because the social workers went multiple times to the commune to, you know, to find you know, any proof, to be able to figure out, you know, how to prove, you know, that the children were not safe and stuff like that. And it took a lot of back and forth, and like, and again, Roch Thériault was bullshitting his way out of everything. Like the police was not concerned. Another social worker, not the one that we heard about in the documentary, but another social worker was also convinced by Roch that, you know, they were just people who were living very simply in the woods, and like, you know, it's just an alternative way of life, and who are we to judge? And, you know, and it took a lot it took a lot to get those children, and they glanced over that pretty quickly. But anywho, that documentary, I think, had a really important angle of really taking that angle from Gabrielle's perspective. But yeah, so this is Roch in prison. This is Roch here. I do want to go into some of Roch's speeches, because he did talk a couple of times, and I just want to see if we can find that. Like there were a couple of people who did videos, you know, like we see here, like one video that I would recommend. I guess we could do that. I will recommend to you a couple of videos and podcasts that you can watch. So first of all is Dark Histories, this one. So he has multiple parts. I think there's 2 parts. So Roch Thériault and the Anthill Kids. This is an excellent video that you can watch. He goes very deep. He does a very deep dive into the whole thing in a very concise and clear way. Good stream, Amy. Got a log for tonight. Be on soon. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for hanging out. And next week, we're going to go into the fake moon landing conspiracy theory. So if you wanna be there for that stream, that'd be awesome. And I'm probably gonna play Planet Zoo tomorrow. on Monday. But have a good night, Steven. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will see you soon. So this one is an awesome one by Dark Histories. I highly recommend watching that. The documentary that we just watched is the Deadly Messiah crime documentary. If you want to go watch it or whatever. There's also a movie that was made, and that movie is entirely on YouTube from the Anchor channel. Moïse, l'affaire Roch Thériault. It is in French, unfortunately, but there is a lot of English in the movie, so it's actually a good way to, like, if you're someone who's learning French, like, it's a good one because it's like half and half in French and English, because most of the time that they were active was in Ontario, so they were French, but they lived in Ontario, so the movie is also quite Anglophone, so you can watch the movie. It's not a very good movie, honestly. Like, it's not a good movie. J'aime écouter toi. Well, thank you. I am there for being écouté. So yeah, so if you want to watch a movie, that's a movie, and that movie actually spends a lot of time on the children. So if you're curious about how that whole process of being able to take the children away from the cult, that's probably a good one that you can watch. However, it's just not a good movie overall, but it's not bad, but it's like okay. This one I did not watch, but yeah, I watched the Dark History one. This one was awesome. And there's the movie that you can watch. There's also Savage Messiah that you can watch. That's okay, so they have a dub version. So that's Savage Messiah in French, and you have Savage Messiah in English here. So by the same channel that you can watch. It's entirely on YouTube. You can watch it. And I'm trying to find the one thing I'm trying to find here right now is to hear about Roch. Oh, this is one of the first interviews that she delivered, Gabriel. So you can go watch that. A lot of the things, so here's the thing, right, is that a lot of the material that's available for Roch Thériault is in French. So yeah, but there is quite a bit of videos in English as well. Yeah, so I'm trying to find the there's also this one by JE. However, again, it's in French. I know we can hear him talk. I'm just trying to remember. Roch Thériault interview, maybe? But I don't think they ever did interviews, really. It's like... Nobody, no. Do you think maybe they have it here? Trying to see. Did they say? Jim Jones. No, there's no Roch Thériault in there. No. Oh my god, Roch Thériault was in Claire Lamarche? SNJ, are you here? Excuse me, what? Excuse me, what? Roch Thériault was in Claire Lamarche? Oh my god. What? Yeah, he was there as a spectator with his followers. It's the one in yellow. Wait, let's find him. Yeah, he's here. Look at him! Look at this motherfucker! Why is he there?
Je ne veux pas y croire parce qu'on ne peut pas me le prouver. Monsieur Couillard, est-ce que vous avez, vous, cette ouverture que semble avoir Madame de Gramont?
Tel que vous me voyez, je suis fort.
What? Why? Like, why is he there? Oh, there's also in French. If you're French, Victoria did a really good video going on there. Going after, you know, Roch Thériault. It's very good. Actually, Speaking of cults, we're gonna go eventually. So next week we're gonna do. So I'm gonna try to find a balance between like more lighthearted like subjects and more heavy subjects. So next week we're gonna do the fake moon landing, but the week after I think we're gonna go into Nexium, which includes Hollywood celebrity Allison Mack, and they're, I believe, both in jail now, and yeah, so basically this is crazy. So when people say like, no, you know, nowadays this is a thing that happened in the 70s and in the 60s, like people are not in cults now, like what are you talking about? This is the proof that you're wrong. This is the proof that you're wrong. These things are still a thing. They're very much still a thing. Do you get some of your info from Alex Jones or just browsing past cultish things on YouTube? I don't get info from Alex Jones ever. We're just browsing past cultish things on YouTube. No, but okay, so for this one, I listened to a lot of podcasts for Roch Thériault. And I read, the wiki, I read the Murderpedia, I watched Victoria's video, I watched the Dark Histories video, and I watched this interview with Gabrielle Lavallée. So I watched a couple of things. Right now I'm just kind of like browsing because I'm guessing there's probably more there. So I'm just curious to see. I mean, he was right on some cults things in his time. He's not all wrong, but I understand your point of view. Did he talk about this? I mean, I'm not saying that Alex Jones has never had like a good take in his life. Like obviously anyone can, have good takes. But I don't know if he talked about this. Like I don't know. To be fair, like Alex Jones would probably go ham on this guy, like, I also read a lot of the infocult.org information on cults. A lot of views from psychologists, people in academia, because there is actually a lot of people in academia who focus on cults and why people join cults and the psychology behind that. So yeah, right now I'm just like looking into some stuff because I know for a fact that there were some interviews with him. I just don't find it. That's what I'm saying. It's like hard to find information on this because there's not a lot. Like there's a lot of like people just like talking about it like that, but there's no like the only like documentary that really exists is this one. Because the other ones are made by like YouTubers. Not saying that that's bad. Like there are some really good like high quality documentaries that you can find on YouTube. But in the sense that in mainstream media, this is the only one that I found. And then the movie. But the movie, again, it's like a movie. It's not a documentary. And the movie is actually not that good. And when I say not good, I mean it focuses a lot on the children like social workers case, which I guess is interesting, but it focuses a lot on that and glances over everything else. So the movie is definitely not a good way to get the whole picture. So I guess you do need to watch a couple of things on this to like kind of like get a whole picture of everything. And to come back to Alex Jones, the thing with Alex Jones, right, is I think there was a type of before and after with him. And I mean, I haven't followed his career, you know, from day one, but I think that he did start to descend into a really weird place at some point, where perhaps before he was not as, you know, I don't know, like I think with InfoWars at some point, Alex Jones, he started to really tap into pretty harmful conspiracies, and he started to drink his own Kool-Aid, if that makes sense. And also, you know, going into, like, for example, one thing that I remember that he went into that I was pretty upset about was when the one of the school shootings, I can't remember, but there was a school shooting in the United States a couple years back, and he went into like a weird rant about this one dad who was not crying when he was talking on the interview on TV, and really went ham on this one guy, and like saying that they planted this fake dad to talk about his child, you know, who died, and it was not a real dad, and that a real dad would be crying, and like there was some stuff that he did that was wrong, and you know, that was complete bullshit. Like there was not a guy planted like, you know. So but I think that, like I said, there was a progression into like what happened, because I think that there was some videos of him before that people really were drawn to, because, you know, he was like a no bullshit guy. Like, you know, he would be very like direct and very, you know, there are some things in life that go beyond anyone's wild dream or nightmares. Doesn't stop at movies until you can confirm it's true or false. Yeah, maybe for some stuff, but he was wrong on a lot of things. And the thing is that he goes hard on everything that he does. So like if he's wrong on something, like it's really bad, because he goes so hard on these people that you're like, okay, but you go ham on these guys. And like if you're wrong, like you're not just like saying a thing, like you and his followers are like so passionate about him and like everything that he does, that it's like, come on. Like anything that he say, like people like they drink it. They're like, ugh. So it's like, you know, I think I don't know. I really don't like him personally, but I mean, I've seen like interviews with him and like Joe Rogan and stuff. Hello, Gov Za. How do you say go Visa? Go. Thank you for that follow. Thank you so much. Welcome. But so I saw like a couple of interviews with like him on Joe Rogan, for example, and stuff like that, and you can definitely see that like he's definitely putting on like a show, you know, when he's doing his thing, but he very much believes is what he says, you know. But anyways, yeah, so I'm still looking for Roch Thériault talking, because I know there's footage of Roch Thériault like talking. Roch Thériault G-O, was that? I'm not sure. Hi. I'm not sure how you say it. Did you say Go Visa? Geo Visa? I'm so sorry. I just want to make sure that I don't butcher your name every time you come say hi. Roch Thériault footage, perhaps? Maybe I could try to find that. HD footage, blah, blah, blah. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, and he did stay, so I've been sentenced to life in prison in New Brunswick last February. McDonald was seen on a video from the institution going on Thériault's cell, said, oh man. He is then seen hemorrhaging and pulling a shank from Mr. Thériault's neck. Allman told CBC News, and then goes to the guards and said, in rather cruder words, that these than these that he just killed Mr. Thériault. Wow. So he just went, so he killed Thériault and then he just went to the guards and just went like, hey, I just killed this fucker. Just wanted to say that. Second degree murder means MacDonald intended to kill Thériault, but it wasn't premeditated. MacDonald had expressed some animosity towards Thériault and his prior convictions for killing a woman and maiming another. He said some things about Mr. Thériault prior to his conviction involving girls and women. He killed his wife, cult member Solange Boulard, disemboweling her, chopped off her right arm of another commune with a chainsaw. Since MacDonald is already serving a life sentence for a previous murder, the Crown didn't have to make any submissions for the sentencing. All murders you get life imprisonment. The issue is parole. If a second degree murder, it's normally 10 years or whatever the court orders. But if it's a second degree murder by a person who already has a murder on his record, then the automatic sentence is life without parole for 25 years. Okay. I see. I mean, I'm not surprised though that like he got killed in prison. I mean, what he did is like awful, and the people who did not subscribe to his bullshit really hated him. And they did not go over that in the documentary, but when he went to visit that other cult, I believe it was a cult ran by Alex, what's his face? Alex Joseph. So, Roch Thériault met with Alex Joseph, and where do they stay? I believe Alex Joseph, they were in the US, I just can't remember where. If I do Alex Joseph, in Utah. Yeah, okay, there you go. So he drew inspiration from Alex Joseph, a polygamist and community leader in Big Water, Utah, near the Arizona border. Now 55, a frequent subject of article in supermarket tabloids. Joseph lives with at least 9 wives and there are 20 children. So it's a very similar thing, teachings of the Mormon Church and the Old Testament, and justification for his unconventional lifestyle. According to police, Thériault made at least 3 visits to Joseph's colony. During one of them, the American gave the Anthill kids patriarch a gold-colored crown and named him King of the Israelites in an elaborate ceremony. And I believe at some point, Alex Joseph kicked him out. Anywho, but yeah, isn't that all very intense? Isn't that all very intense? This whole story. Oh my. But yeah, Alex Joseph was, let's try to find him real quick. So this guy was an American outspoken polygamist and founder of the Confederate Nation of Israel, a Mormon fundamentalist sect. As mayor. Oh yeah, and he was the mayor. Yes. Oh yes. Okay. So Alex Joseph was this cult leader, this like of a polygamous cult in Utah. He was the mayor of Utah, and he was the first mayor in the history of the United States to be a libertarian. Fun fact. And Roch Thériault, I'm trying to see, are they going to talk about it here? No. So he's definitely not as bad as Roch Thériault, but he was still, problematic, but he didn't like kill anyone or whatever. But yeah. So anywho, so he was an inspiration for Roch. And fun fact, I mean, that's not a fun fact, but when Roch went there, and the reason why he got kicked out by Alex at some point is because he randomly showed himself. Because Roch was known for having very large ding-dong, and so he was not shy to show it at whoever was there, and so he would show his ding dong to people. Yeah. Good night, Dorian. Thank you so much, and thank you for the lurk. And I apologize that this was like too heavy to like assist, which is completely normal. But yeah, tomorrow we're gonna play some Planet Zoo, you know, just hang out. And next week on the Cultify Sunday, I'm gonna talk about the fake moon landing conspiracies. I'm gonna find something calm to listen to. Ooh, that's awesome. You know what I watch sometimes before bed, like when I just want to like calm down, and like, you know, sometimes I get into my own head at night. And I one thing that really relaxes me for some reason is watching. So there's two things. There's one thing that I watch which is it's a candy manufacturer. Well, it's like a family business. Like they're just like candy makers, and they film themselves making the candy, and it's like you see all the colors and like all the candy being made, and I don't know why it's so soothing. Like it's very soothing. So they're like, it's called shoot, what is it? Candy making video. They're called Hercules Candy. So Hercules Candy, highly recommend this channel. They are so wholesome. They are cute. They are like a small family making candy, and they're so cute. And it's very satisfying. Like you can see, like you see like all of the like candy making. Like it's actually really satisfying. And the other thing that I watch at night sometimes is I watch MRE's review videos. And I know it sounds silly, but I swear that it's actually Steve. I think it's Steve 1989. This guy, he reviews MREs, and he's like, so MREs, if you don't know, is meal ready to eat. And that's what they serve like in the army, and like if you go you know, for example, sometimes if there's a natural disaster or whatever, like they'll have MREs to give to the population and whatever, and these are meals that are ready to eat from there. MRE, I watched a lot just because Moon plays them while making coffee. Really? Really? And this guy is my favorite one. Steve 1989 MRE info. This guy is so good, and he's like, he has some type of like Bob Ross energy. I don't know how to explain it. Like he just has this Bob Ross energy. I can't explain. I just can't explain. But yeah, but good night, Dorian. Thank you so much for passing by and leaving me that lurk. I really appreciate it. You're awesome. But yeah, like, see, wait, I'm gonna find one just to play like real quick. I'm not gonna watch it all, but most popular maybe. Like he ate stuff from 1969, 1945, and he eats that stuff. I swear, like this guy has like a stomach of steel. He has a stomach of steel. Good night. Good night. Good night. Heart, heart. I love all of the little little emotes that you have. Are these all oh no, because you have Slummy, you have all the different pride hearts from the Twitch. Cute. But okay, let's watch one like real quick. This one is from 1863. Excuse me?
Completely inedible. Okay, it'd be like eating cleaning of its kind.
It's a hardtack? It's just a hardtack. The oldest cracker ever eaten.
Yeah, it smells like... That's cool.
That looks like paper.
Like mothballs and like library books.
It just looks like paper.
Pretty amazing. Look at that old label. Check that out.
That literally just looks like paper. Oh, that's paper. That was paper. That's the tack. That's the cookie.
It kind of tastes exactly the way it smells. It tastes like mothballs and old library books.
Tastes like mud balls and old library books. Yum.
That's not very good. Well, what is hardtack anyway?
You know what's funny is that he always says that. He's like, that's not very good. And then he eats the whole thing. Like, well, he doesn't always eat the whole thing, but he often eats the whole thing. And he'll like talk about every item. Like he'll like watch every single of the item, and he'll talk about it. He's gonna be like, between like 1944 to 1946, like this was the favored coffee amongst the soldiers, but then they changed it for like this brand, and then people were really pissed because this one tasted like shit. And it's like, how do you know all that?
Might get this main. It's fine though. Look at that chocolate hazelnut
This one's from
bread.
2015. It's not. You know, give me that old shit.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover.
Ask. Okay. Oh, that's bad. All right.
Ew, what is that? Spaghetti? Hell no, that's not spaghetti.
Had a malfunction being about 47 years old compared to
That is not spaghetti, sir.
stuck in there. And that's that. It's just not happening.
A Vietnam meal combat
Just
individual
listening out,
C-ration.
man. Okay.
Spaghetti.
It's just a little circular roll.
He's gonna eat it.
There's just something about all this that just
Ew.
never ceases to it. Oh.
Ew.
You know what? That's a lot of weird looking spaghetti.
Well, no shit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just there's all sorts of food there. Look at that. Oh, amount of spaghetti and meat sauce. This is probably one of the better entrees. It sure beats ham and lima beans. This is the only part I can imagine still going to be good from this thing. So,
He's gonna eat it. Probably not all of it, but he's gonna taste it.
Because, okay, I lightly glide them on the moist. Still have these creamer last.
Look at the views on this. Like, people love it.
Oh yeah, that's better than Taster's Choice.
Yes, when you had cigarettes in your rations, dudes.
Get that cheese smell out of it.
You had cigarettes.
All right.
Look at him. I love him so much. Like, just look at him. He just tries the cigarettes.
You got some of that spearmint
He's the
flavor
best.
draw.
I love him.
I haven't had a sea ration Marlboro.
He's kind of hot in a weird way. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's kind of hot, you know? I love how he just tries everything. He's like, great cigarette.
Oh yeah.
He's like, oh yeah. Why do I find this so good? Why do I love that so much?
Package from G Schultz. He gave me 2 meal kits, supply MREs, and a Big Trouble Little China shirt. Oh yeah. Ooh, that's a nice hard hitter too. Even with the filter.
It's a nice hard hitter.
I'm not sure what year they started putting.
Anyways, we're gonna end it here, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. My god, my makeup, I had some makeup on and I cried. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me during this wild ride. This podcast was not, I'm saying a podcast, it's not really a podcast. I guess it's more like a just chatting live stream, I think is the best way to put it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me during this. I know that this was a very heavy subject, but I do believe that, you know, it's an important thing to talk about, and it's an important thing to expose, because cults are not something that, you know, we're safe from even nowadays. There is a lot of things that were not necessarily talked about. Like I said in the documentary, so I do encourage you to go and research. You know, there are like a lot of podcasts that talked about Roch Thériault. The last podcast on the left talked about it quite recently, actually. They just covered it, so you can go check that out. You know, it's just interesting to me that, like, we talk about people like Charles Manson. We've been talking about him, you know, in society for so long, and he's deemed as like one of the worst people that's ever lived, which is true. But compared to what someone like Roch Thériault did, and nobody really talks about it, to me, I'm like, what? Like, there are countless movies and countless like TV shows and documentaries and books and freaking theses on like on the Charles Manson and the Manson family, and I think the only reason why is really just because they killed Sharon Tate, who was a very popular actress at the time. So that's why probably they gained a lot of notoriety. But people like Roch Thériault and these cults that nobody are talking about need to be talked about, because we need to understand that, like, again, you're not safe from a cult. Like, perhaps you and I would not join a cult because, you know, we think, you know, it's like it's all just crazy and like I would never fall for that and whatever. But, you know, there are still cults that exist today. Like, we've seen it with NXIVM, and like people who, and there are successful people who join these cults, like lawyers and doctors. And, you know, we've seen it in the case of Roch Thériault, like the head of psychology of the Montreal hospital was supporting him and sponsoring him, and basically like just enabling Roch Thériault to do what he was doing, and like giving him the basically confirmation, you know, that he was God's, you know, Messiah, you know. Anyways, let's host someone. Let's see who's live. Let's see who is live. Twitch.tv, www.ditch.tv. We have, Monteezy is live, and she's playing Phasmophobia. I mean, if we want to stay in the creepy vibe, you know what? Let's do that. Let's do that. So let's raid. How do you do raids? Let's try to do it. Okay, I want to try to do it. So Monteezy. And yes, so thank you so much for hanging out, guys. I love you, and I will see you tomorrow for some Planet Zoo at 8 p.m. And yeah, thank you again so much for hanging out, and I love you, and have a good night. And tomorrow will be way more positive and way more chill and, like, you know, cute with little animals. So go give some Monteezy some love. She's playing Phasmophobia, so go support her during her spooky time. And I will see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye. Love you.